Chapter 4284. Evil Woman. The human emperor's eyes darkened. The killing intent in his eyes seemed to have solidified, enveloping the heavens and earth. It was formless and caused everyone to feel a suffocating pressure. He came to the Thousand Layers ghost domain to kill the evil woman. He was well aware of the dangers of the thousand-layer ghost forest. Ultimately, he needed the four great evil lords of the ghost clan, who were not weaker than the elders of the Renwang Palace. Hence, he had come personally. To his surprise, he sensed the aura of the underworld sword sea as soon as he arrived at Ghost Domain. Of course, he knew that there were only a few people in this world who had the ability to open the underworld sword sea, and Yin Fenghua happened to be one of them. He had guessed that Yin Fenghua had opened the underworld sword sea to lure him here, so he had come. The 10 Annihilation Evil Woman is the great empress in the ghost race's prophecy. Even the human sovereign palace cannot back down, said Yin Fenghua with a cold expression. Yin Fenghua, how confident do you think the ghost clan can fight against the human emperor palace with their current strength? The human emperor's lips twitched as sword essence surged like a silver snake lurking in the void. Although the ghost race is no longer as glorious as it once was, there are still many experts in the 4 ghost lineages. There are at least 3 experts who are as powerful as me, together with Gui Zhu and the Ghost Lord, as well as the elders of the 4 ghost bloodlines. If your human emperor palace wants to defeat the ghost race, you must pay the price. Yin Fenghua was calm and composed, not afraid at all. Brother Yin Feng, are you talking about the 4 great evil lords of the ghost race? Ren Huang merely smiled, and the corner of his lips curled up in disdain. But in my eyes, aside from Brother Yin Feng, the other 3 are not worth mentioning. As for the others you mentioned, in front of the human emperor's palace, they're even more useless. Yin Fenghua's face instantly became gloomier. He didn't expect that human sovereign had such a thorough understanding of the ghost clan. The Hall of Human Emperors was mysterious and powerful. They had secretly ruled over the Saints' world for tens of millions of years. Every single person in the Hall of Human Emperors was a peak expert. Aside from the 4 evil exalts, no one else among the ghosts posed any threat to the Hall of Human Emperors. In fact, even among the 4 evil lords, only Yin Fenghua was considered a true powerhouse. The other 3 were much weaker. Human Emperor Mu, there is a power that you can't imagine in the Thousand Layers ghost realm. Although the ghost race is weak, they are not completely defenseless. Yin Fenghua calmed down and said heavily, the ghost race is not the only enemy of the human emperor palace. I hope that the human emperor's palace won't waste too much energy on one person. Brother Yin Feng, since you asked me to come here, I'm sure you already have a plan in mind. You won't say it out loud, right? The human emperor smiled faintly and said directly, Human Emperor Mu, you and I represent the human emperor palace and the ghost race respectively. Why don't we make a bet? Yin Fenghua said after a moment of silence. Let's hear it. The human emperor laughed. He was interested. I'll bet on the 2 of them. Yin Fenghua glanced at Nie Tian and Lin Fan and said, the yellow spring holy ground has opened, and the yellow spring flower will bloom again very soon. We'll bet on who between Nie Tian and Lin Fan can walk to the end with the evil woman as the wager. As he spoke, his eyes darkened, and he looked at Nie Tian meaningfully. He continued, if Nie Tian wins, the human emperor's palace will let the evil woman go. If Lin Fan wins, what will the ghost race do? Before Yin Fenghua could finish, the human emperor asked directly, if Lin Fan wins, the ghost race will hand over the evil woman. Yin Fenghua said word by word after a long silence. All right, we'll swear on our sword hearts that we won't go back on our words. The human emperor's eyes trembled slightly, and he responded with a clear voice. Then he waved his hand, and a sword heart curse stone appeared in the air. Following that, a stream of blood spurted out from his fingertip. His sword will instantly erupted and turned into a sword seal, which was engraved on the sword heart curse stone. Seeing this, Yin Fenghua did the same and left a bloodline sword seal on the stone. Both of them were the top swordsmen in the world, so they naturally understood what it meant to swear on their sword hearts. Once a sword heart oath was violated, a sword heart evil seed would grow in one's heart. If it was light, one would go berserk, and if it was heavy, one would lose their life. This time, they were cutting off all paths of retreat and risking their lives. Nie Tian was shocked by the scene before him. His expression was dull, and he couldn't react for a long time. He didn't expect Yin Fengwu to bring him here to protect Rui Qinyu in such a way. But could he really win against Lin Fan? In the battle just now, he was utterly defeated. He lost 3 times in 3 strikes and almost lost his life. Where did Yin Fengwu get the courage to make such a decision? Meanwhile, on the other side, Lin Fan had a smile on his face. His eyes were like those of a hungry wolf, filled with the desire to hunt. Even though he had won the previous 3 sword strikes, the fact that Nie Tian had countered his 3rd sword strike was beyond his expectations. He really wanted to fight with Nie Tian again. This was the first time he had such high hopes for a swordsman of the same level. Therefore, the upcoming battle of the Yellow Springs made him excited. Whoosh! At this moment, Ren Huang raised his arm and a ray of sword chi shot out, cutting the sword heart curse stone in half and perfectly cutting the 2 bloodline sword seals. Brother Yin Feng, we will each take half of the sword heart curse stone. Ren Huang held 1/2 of the stone and gave the other half to Yin Fengwu. Yin Fengwu took the sword heart curse stone. The bloodline sword seals on it were left by Ren Huang. Both of them took each other's bloodline sword seals. Obviously, there was no room for negotiation. Brother Yin Feng, I still have something to do. I will take my leave first. See you in half a month. Ren Huang kept the sword heart curse stone and left. Nie Tian, I look forward to seeing you become stronger. Only then will the battle be interesting. Lin Fan looked at Nie Tian and smiled before flying towards the direction where Ren Huang disappeared. Yin Fengwu and Nie Tian stared at the direction where the 2 disappeared in silence. They each had their own thoughts and didn't say a word. Nie Tian, do you hate me? After a while, Yin Fengwu finally asked in a deep voice, You saw my battle with the young human emperor earlier. Aren't you afraid that I will lose? Nie Tian frowned. His tone was calm and emotionless. Yin Fengwu smiled bitterly and sighed. I have no other choice. I have to do this. The human emperor's hall was too powerful. Even if the ghost race used all their power, they still wouldn't be able to resist. Nie Tian, this bet was the only chance for the evil woman and the ghost race. Fortunately, Nie Tian had been crushed in the previous battle. Otherwise, the human emperor might not have accepted this bet. Chapter 4285. You, Nie Tian, are even more of a sore loser. His words were like a sudden clap of thunder that shook Nie Tian's heart and soul for some reason. Yin Fengwu had already seen through everything. He wasn't betting on Nie Tian's strength, but that Nie Tian was more of a sore loser than the Gue clan. Because he couldn't afford to lose, he couldn't lose. Nie Tian became cold. He stared at Yin Fengwu for a long time without saying anything. Yin Fengwu's move was dangerous and ruthless. He hovered a sharp sword above Nie Tian's head, forcing the latter to win. Nie Tian, I believe that anyone who can break through the sword formation of 7 injuries is no ordinary person. You. Yin Fengwu seemed to have guessed what Nie Tian was thinking, and he spoke in a deep voice. However, before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted by Nie Tian. I won't lose, Nie Tianling said coldly. His voice was filled with unparalleled determination. Since he was forced into a dead end, he would face it head-on and press forward. Yin Fengwu nodded slightly and said no more. He knew that this was unfair to Nie Tian, but he had no other choice. In the following days, Nie Tian cultivated nonstop, hoping to make a breakthrough in his strength before the Battle of the Yellow Springs began. Unfortunately, the more eager he was to break through, the more chaotic his sword heart became, and the more he couldn't improve. Yin Fengwu could see that Nie Tian was uncertain. He wanted to remind him many times, but he held back in the end. He knew that there were some things that Nie Tian had to figure out himself. Others' advice was useless and might even have the opposite effect. At the same time, some swordsmen began to enter the Yellow Springs sacred land. It was the first time these swordsmen had come to the Yellow Springs sacred land, so they were completely unfamiliar with the place. Of course, there were a few who had been here before, but had left because they didn't have the right to comprehend the sword in the Yellow Springs. In Feng Wua discovered that a large portion of the swordsmen who entered this time were young swordsmen. There were even some who were about the same age as Nie Tian. It seemed that many sword geniuses had appeared in the sacred world in recent years. Suddenly, In Feng Wua realized that there were many people gathered not far away. Something seemed to have happened. Let's go and take a look. In Feng Wua saw that Nie Tian was cultivating, so he decided to go and take a look himself. In midair, thousands of people gathered together, and in the center of them, two figures stood coldly, their auras clashing. Damn girl, you want to fight me? You're simply courting death. The black-robed swordsman's sword intent surged around him, like a black cloud, incomparably gloomy, giving off an extremely oppressive feeling. And opposite him, a devastatingly beautiful figure in snow-white clothes, as cold as ice. Like a mountain, although the sword intent around him was surging, it was not released and was extremely restrained. She was very calm, as if the black-robed swordsman in front of her did not exist. The surrounding swordsmen looked at the two of them and could not help but discuss. This black-robed swordsman's sword intent is very vigorous. He should be a famous swordsman. That guy is Yi Xiangshan of the Sunsword Villa, one of the three banes of the Sunward. I heard that he was a peak swordsman at the peak of sword consciousness defiant a long time ago. He's probably a swordsman of Saint Defire by now. I wonder how that girl offended him. She actually provoked him. That girl is still young. She'll probably be killed by Yi Xiangshan with a single strike. It's a pity that she's so beautiful, the crowd said as they looked at the white-robed woman with some pity. However, the white-robed woman was like an iceberg, unmoved by the outside world at all. It was as if everything that was happening had nothing to do with her. At this moment, In Feng Wu's eyes suddenly lit up as he looked at the white-robed woman. Even though the white-robed woman had deliberately restrained her sword intent, it was completely exposed before a swordsman of In Feng Wu's level. In Feng Wu really did not expect the white-robed woman's sword intent to be so terrifying. In that instant, the scene of his battle with the white-robed woman appeared in his mind, and the outcome was actually uncertain. At his level, his sword intent was already extremely precise. This undoubtedly meant that the white-robed woman's sword intent was not inferior to his. It was just too terrifying. In Feng Wu was a swordsman who had become one with the sword. His sword intent had reached the peak, and it was something rarely seen in the world. Even Yetan, who had broken the 7 wounding sword formation, could not compare to him in terms of sword intent. However, the white-robed woman was not any weaker than him. There was no way he would not be shocked. He could not even believe that there was such a terrifying swordswoman in the world. Due to the difference between male and female martial bodies, it was much more difficult for a female swordsman to reach the peak of sword intent compared to a male swordsman. From this, it could be seen that the white-robed woman's talent in the sword Dao was even greater than In Feng Wu's. If In Feng Wu had met the woman earlier, he might have chosen her to fight against Lin Fan instead of Nie Tian. However, the white-robed woman was very young. Her sword Dao was only in the 9th level of sword Heavenly Calamity, while her opponent, Yi Xiangshan, was a swordsman in the 1st level of Saint Defire. There was practically no chance for a swordsman in the 9th level of sword Heavenly Calamity to win against a swordsman in the 1st level of Saint Defire. The difference in sword Dao became even more obvious the further one went. It was true that the white-robed woman was a monstrous swordsman, but Yi Xiangshan was clearly not a mediocre swordsman. The difference between them was an entire level, and it was like the difference between heaven and earth. In Feng Wu knew that even if he suppressed his realm to the 9th level of sword Heavenly Calamity and did not use the advantage of his martial body, it would still be very difficult for him to defeat Yi Xiangshan. When he thought of this, he could not help but feel a little nervous. He was already prepared to attack. He would not allow such an outstanding swordsman to fall in front of him like this. Die, you damn girl! In the air, Yi Xiangshan let out a low bellow. after which his silhouette directly moved and a black heavy sword appeared in his hands. As he slashed out, his sword intent burst forth, and a sword shadow the size of a mountain suddenly pressed down, enveloping the white-robed woman. It enveloped her. Everyone's eyes trembled. Their nerves instantly tensed up, as if they could already see a devastating scene. However, the white-robed woman stood where she was. She did not move, and there was not even the slightest change in her expression. When the sword shadow was only 100 meters away from her, she finally moved. Swoosh! In an instant, a sword will that was as red as blood suddenly exploded. Instantly, a terrifying sharp aura spread out, and the heavens and the earth fell into a chilling atmosphere. In the next instant, an extremely shocking scene happened. In midair, the mountain-like sword shadow was directly split into two halves by a ray of red light, shattering into pieces. Yi Xiangshan's eyes trembled. Before he could react, a ray of red light flew in front of him. The distance between his eyes widened infinitely, and his whole body was actually split in half. The shocking and bloody scene shocked everyone present. Everyone's eyes trembled violently, and they were immediately petrified. The whole world seemed to be frozen. The white-robed woman was expressionless, but the sharpness in her eyes caused people to tremble. In the distance, Nietian looked at the figure that was like an ice mountain and said in a daze, Shua. Chapter 4286. Cold Phoenix, Ji Shui. Nietian's eyes trembled slightly. He stared at the cold figure in the air in disbelief. It was as if he was in a dream, and he was stunned for a long time. He never thought that he would run into Cold Phoenix, Ji Shui here. Cold Phoenix, Ji Shui, stood coldly in the air. The aloofness in her eyes was like ice that would not melt for 10,000 years. There was a bone-chilling coldness in her eyes. After a long while, the crowd reacted to the situation, and gasps of shock could be heard. Just who is this woman? How could she be so strong? Yi Xiangshan is one of the three evils of the heavy sword, a swordsman at the level of Saint D Fire. This woman killed him with one slash. Isn't she a swordsman at the peak of Saint D Fire? This is the first time I've seen such a young swordsman at the peak of Saint D Fire, and she's a woman. How terrifying! As the crowd spoke, the way they looked at Cold Phoenix, Ji Shui, changed completely. There was fear in their eyes that could not be hidden. In the distance, Yin Fengwu's eyes glazed over for a few seconds. Only then did he react. The shock in his heart was like a stormy sea, causing him to almost jump up in shock. He had been prepared to attack, but he did not expect Cold Phoenix, Ji Shui, to be so terrifying. She killed Yi Xiangshan with one slash. At that moment, he was certain that if he fought with Cold Phoenix, Ji Shui in terms of sword will, he would definitely lose. He could not imagine that there was such a terrifying swordsman in the world. He had always thought that his talent in the way of the sword had reached its limit, but at that moment, in front of Cold Phoenix, Ji Shui, he felt that he was very mediocre. In the air, Cold Phoenix, Ji Shui, suddenly noticed something. Her eyes darkened, and she fixed her gaze on Nietian in the distance. A burning light appeared in her eyes, but it disappeared in a flash. Then, without saying anything, she turned around and was prepared to leave. Stupid girl, you killed someone from Heavy Sword Villa, and you want to leave just like that? But at that moment, a deep voice rose, and a powerful sword glare appeared. It sliced through the air and went to attack Cold Phoenix, Ji Shui. Danger! The crowd was so shocked by the scene in front of them that their eyes trembled, and they instinctively cried out. Cold Phoenix, Ji Shui, frowned slightly. A crimson sword appeared in her hand, and countless flame-like sword shadows surged out. They instantly formed a sword shield that blocked the fatal sword glare. However, she still suffered from the terrifying impact. Her figure could not help but fall back a few meters. She swayed a few times before she stabilized herself. Although she tried her best to hold on, there was still a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth. Seeing this, Yin Fengwu could not help but frown. He was puzzled. Although the previous sword ray was powerful, it was not much stronger than Yi Xiangshan's attack. The cold phoenix Ji Shui was able to kill Yi Xiangshan with a single strike, so there was no reason for her to be injured by this sword light. She has an old injury. In the next moment, Yin Fengwu suddenly noticed it. His pupils shrank, and he cried out in shock. He suddenly felt that there was a violent sword force attacking Lung Huang Ji Shui's body, which was why she was injured. This berserk sword energy was clearly not caused by the sword attack just now. Rather, it had already existed in Lung Huang Ji Shui's body. In other words, the cold phoenix Ji Shui had killed Yi Xiangshan with a single slash, even though she herself was injured. If she wasn't injured, it was hard to imagine how terrifying she would be. Shan Ashui. At this moment, someone recognized the person who had just attacked and couldn't help but cry out, "Damn girl, you killed my third brother. Don't even think about leaving here alive today." High up in the sky, a burly man in black robes had a dark expression. He stared at Lung Huang Ji Shui and roared in a low voice. Seeing this, the crowd immediately exploded. Shan Ashui is the second of the heavy sword Three Evils, and Yi Xiangshan is his sworn brother. This is bad. Two of the heavy sword Three Evils have appeared at the same time. Could it be that the legendary sword butcher Lung Qinxiang is also here? The heavy sword Three Evils rarely split up. Lung Qinxiang is probably here too. As the crowd discussed, they looked around, trying to find the leader of the heavy sword Three Evils. The heavy sword Three Evils were from the heavy sword villa. Although the heavy sword villa was not a peak force in the all-heaven sacred world, it was still quite powerful. Especially in the sword world, the heavy sword villa was famous for its fierceness. They often plundered and annexed other sword sections. According to the legends, the master of the heavy sword villa was a swordsman at the peak of Saint D Fire. He had an extremely terrifying background. Because of this, ordinary great forces did not dare to provoke the heavy sword villa. The heavy sword Three Evils were the experts of the heavy sword villa. They had made great contributions to the expansion of the heavy sword villa, especially the leader of the three, Lung Qinxiang. She had once destroyed 13 sword sects and massacred their sections. Her methods were extremely cruel, and she was called the sword butcher in the sword world. At this moment, the crowd could not help but worry that Lung Qinxiang was also here. If that was the case, Lung Huang Ji Shui was dead for sure. The crowd was shocked by Lung Huang Ji Shui's talent. If she died just like that, it would be quite a pity. "Make your move." Lung Huang Ji Shui raised her head slightly and looked at Shan Ashui in the sky. She was like a sword of ice and snow, emotionless. "You're looking to die." Shan Ashui was infuriated. He roared and slashed with his sword. Immediately, the sword turned into a torrential wave. The wave swallowed everything and pressed towards Lung Huang Ji Shui fiercely. Lung Huang Ji Shui's sword pierced through the air. Wherever the tip of the sword pointed, the sword burst forth. The crimson sword shadow whizzed out like a dragon. Bang! In the next moment, the two extreme powers collided. The crimson sword shadow tore a hole in the endless wave, but it was still drowned by the torrential sword will. Lung Huang Ji Shui's figure moved, but she was forced to retreat 1,000 meters. Before she could stabilize herself, she spat out a mouthful of blood. Although she was extremely talented, her cultivation level was too low. In addition to her old injuries, it was impossible for her to fight against Shan Ashui head-on. "Die!" Shan Ashui roared again. Instantly, an even more terrifying sword attack erupted and went straight for Lung Huang Ji Shui. Rumble! The surging sword set off monstrous waves in the sky. Its majestic power seemed to want to swallow everything. Lung Huang Ji Shui's eyes were gloomy. The sword will around her was surging, but the sword power in her body was like a wild beast. It seemed to want to tear her body apart, and she could not use any power at all. Share! In the distance, Nyat Tian's pupil shrank. He rushed over, but it was already too late. At the critical moment, just as the majestic sword was about to drown Lung Huang Ji Shui, a strange scene happened. A boundless sword swept across the sky. Its aura was not very strong, but it was like the spring wind and rain. It instantly dissipated Shan Ashui's sword will into nothingness. This! Everyone's eyes trembled. They were stunned by the strange scene. Chapter 4287. Shan Ishui's sword was broken, and an old man as fat as a ball appeared in front of him. He could not help but be shocked, and his expression changed drastically. Although the figure of the old man before him was a little exaggerated, the sword intent that surged around him was extremely terrifying. He was like a lion that was accumulating strength and waiting to strike. Once he struck, he would be able to tear everything apart. Shan Ishui was the second of the three heavy sword criminals. Even though he was not a peak swordsman, his perception toward sword was still very strong. At that moment, he sensed one word from the old man's sword will: pressure. This pressure made him, a swordsman at the level of Saint D Fire, feel like he could not breathe. With his realm and power, even a swordsman at the peak of Saint D Fire would not be able to give him such great pressure. Just who is this old man? Nie Tian looked at the old man, and his tense heart instantly relaxed, because the old man was Yin Fenghua. Yin Fenghua could be said to be at the peak of the sword world. Since he had attacked, Rui Qinyu would naturally be fine. The crowd looked at Yin Fenghua, and their expressions changed. They were all extremely talented swordsmen. Even though Yin Fenghua had intentionally restrained his sword will, they could still sense how terrifying he was. The three heavy sword criminals, right? Yin Fenghua lifted his head slightly and looked at Shan Ishui. He said with a smile, "No matter what, you are a great swordsman and a senior of the sword world. It seems a little inappropriate for you to attack a little girl in front of so many people. Old mister, this woman killed my third brother. As her second brother, it is only natural that I take revenge. This is a private matter between me and the witch. Please be magnanimous and do not meddle in this." Shan Ishui's expression was restrained, and his tone was respectful. He was not an idiot. Of course, he knew that Yin Fenghua was not someone to be trifled with. "I'm sorry, I have no other interests, but I like to meddle in other people's business." Yin Fenghua chuckled and said, "In my opinion, this matter should end here." "Senior, what do you mean?" Shan Ishui frowned. It was clear that he was suppressing his anger. The three heavy sword criminals were reputable people. How could he let them die in vain? "I can tell that your third brother is not a good person at first glance. This little girl killed him. He deserves it. If you don't want to die, leave here quickly." Yin Fenghua didn't want to waste any more time, so he said coldly. When Shan Ishui heard that Yin Fenghua wanted to chase him away, his face darkened. He said, "Senior, this is not your place. What right do you have to chase me away?" "I'm sorry, this really is my place." Yin Fenghua smiled again and took a step forward. In the blink of an eye, before Shan Ashui could react, a streak of blood splashed in front of his eyes, and one of his arms was severed. He was as he wanted. He wanted. "Big brother." Shan Ashui suddenly turned around and saw a familiar face behind him. He could not help but feel happy. Lung Qinxiang. Lung Qinxiang's sudden appearance made everyone's gazes tremble. Many people simultaneously cried out in alarm. Lung Qinxiang's face was solemn. He stared at Yin Fenghua with sharp eyes. He was not afraid at all. What a strong, murderous aura. Nie Tian looked at Lung Qinxiang. He could feel the murderous aura around Lung Qinxiang. He could not help but shudder. He had seen many powerful swordsmen, but he had never seen someone with such a strong, murderous aura. Lung Qinxiang was just standing there, but the murderous aura around him gave people a suffocating feeling of deterrence. Sword killer, the butcher of swords. Lung Qinxiang's hands were stained with countless lives. His murderous aura was nourished by these lives. This strong, murderous aura made him much stronger than other swordsmen of the same level. Here comes a big one. Yin Fenghua looked at Lung Qinxiang and smiled, but his eyes were strange. He seemed to have discovered something. "Old thing, mind your own business," Lung Qinxiang said in a deep voice. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. Even facing Yin Fenghua, he was not afraid at all. What if this deity wants to interfere? Infeng Wua smiled again. His expression became even more strange. Die! Lung Chinxiang was silent for a few seconds. Then he moved. Like an arrow leaving the bow, he condensed a strong, murderous aura and suddenly shot out to attack Infeng Wua. He was very smart. He knew that he was not Infeng Wua's opponent, so he attacked in an instant. He wanted to catch the latter unprepared. In the blink of an eye, a terrifying, murderous aura spread out. Everyone felt as though an invisible hand was strangling their necks at this moment. This was the terrifying part of Lung Chinxiang. The instantaneous burst of sword intent and murderous aura combined perfectly. It formed an extremely strong suppressive force. Even some people stronger than him could be instantly killed. But unfortunately, Infeng Wua was too strong. He was far from his match. Just as Lung Chinxiang was about to approach Infeng Wua, he suddenly felt an invisible pressure coming from the void. It made his figure stagnate. He could not move an inch forward. Then, an even more terrifying force appeared. It instantly imprisoned him and pressed down on him. It was as if it wanted to squeeze him to death. How? Lung Chinxiang said with difficulty. He resisted with all his might, but the force was getting stronger and stronger. It was not something he could fight against. He did not expect Infeng Wua to be so terrifying. He could crush him with the pure power of sword intent. Everyone was shocked by the scene in front of them. They all sucked in a breath of cold air, speechless. Lung Chinxiang was a swordsman who was close to the peak of Sword Marshal Saint D Fire. But he could not fight back in front of Infeng Wua. How strong was the latter? But Infeng Wua did not kill Lung Chinxiang. Instead, he controlled his sword intent in an extremely subtle way. He made the latter beg for death. Old thing, kill me if you have the guts. Lung Chinxiang was extremely fierce. He forced himself to roar. The blood in his body surged. It caused several bloody wounds to appear on his body. Nie Tian frowned. He did not know what Infeng Wua was doing. The latter was not the kind of person who took pleasure in torturing people. Your sword intent, who taught you? Infeng Wua's face darkened. He asked in a deep voice. Sword intent? Nie Tian was stunned. He suddenly realized that Lung Chinxiang's sword intent was similar to Infeng Wua's 7-wound sword intent. Could it be that Lung Chinxiang and Infeng Wua had some relationship? Lung Chinxiang's face was twisted. He refused to speak. Chapter 4288. A murderous figure appeared in the sky. He was like a bolt of lightning that tore through space and shook the world. Infeng Wua's eyes trembled violently when he heard this voice. He suddenly raised his head and locked his eyes on the murderous figure. His gloomy face immediately changed. He was shocked and even slightly terrified. Nie Tian's heart clenched when he saw Infeng Wua's reaction. He looked at the figure in the sky. The person who came was tall and sturdy. He stood there with his back straight like a sharp sword, releasing a terrifying aura. He was hidden under a black robe, so no one could see his face clearly. However, the sword while surging around him was extremely terrifying. His eyes shone with eerily cold light as he locked onto Infeng Wua. You're not dead. Infeng Wua's eyes trembled as he spoke in a low voice, as if he had seen a ghost. Nie Tian could not help but feel puzzled. With Infeng Wua's strength and composure, just who could make him so nervous? Teacher, you haven't returned to heaven yet. How can your disciple be one step ahead of you? The newcomer said coldly. His voice was hoarse and low, and it was filled with great pressure. Disciple. Nie Tian's eyes trembled. He had not expected the newcomer to be Infeng Wua's disciple. However, if he was Infeng Wua's disciple, why was he so surprised? That's impossible. Infeng Wua calmed down and said in a low voice, I killed you back then. You can't be alive. Nie Tian frowned. He finally understood why Infeng Wua was acting so strangely. Teacher, it's rare that you still remember that you killed me. The newcomer's eyes shone like a wolf in the night. He said, It's a pity that I'm not fated to die. I've lived until now. Teacher, you must be very disappointed. His voice was extremely low and filled with eerily cold, killing intent. It was as if the person before him was not his teacher, but his greatest enemy. You have reason to hate me for what happened back then, but I've never regretted it, Yin Fenghua said in a low voice as he recalled many things. Tang Baiming was the newcomer's name. A very long time ago, Tang Baiming had been a genius with a sword with outstanding talent. Before he was 1,000 years old, he had reached Saint Defire realm of sword martial arts, shocking the sacred world. At that time, many people only knew that Tang Baiming was a peerless sword prodigy, but almost no one knew that he was being guided by a peak expert, Yin Fenghua. For a long time, Yin Fenghua and Tang Baiming were master and disciple in reality, but not in name. Because Yin Fenghua had a rule of never accepting disciples, he only taught Tang Baiming, but did not accept him as a disciple. Tang Baiming was grateful to Yin Feng's selflessness and wanted to become his disciple. Then, one day, Yin Fenghua unintentionally mentioned that Tang Baiming had given pointers to another person and had almost taken that person as his disciple. From that day onwards, Tang Baiming bore a grudge against Yin Fenghua. He believed that Yin Fenghua was unwilling to accept him as a disciple because of that person. Therefore, he began to use every possible means to inquire about that person. Finally, he found out that person's identity and found that person. After Tang Baiming found that person, a battle of life and death broke out between the two due to the long-standing resentment in his heart. In the end, Tang Baiming killed that person. In order to prevent this matter from spreading, he killed more than 1,000 people in that person's family. Unfortunately, Yin Fenghua still refused to accept Tang Baiming as a disciple. In a fit of rage, Tang Baiming revealed the murder, which immediately angered Yin Fenghua. In a fit of rage, Yin Fenghua killed Tang Baiming with his own hands and buried him in a nameless valley in the Thousand Layers Ghost Domain. But what Yin Fenghua never expected was that Tang Baiming was not dead. Hey! Tang Baiming looked at Yin Fenghua and smiled strangely. He said, "My swordsmanship was imparted to me by Master. What reason do I have to hate Master? It's just that I don't understand. I treat Master like a teacher and a father, and I revere him like a god. Why did Master refuse to accept me as a disciple? Master and disciple are just a relationship. It's just a meaningless title. Is it really that important?" Yin Fenghua frowned and said, "I'm glad that I didn't accept you back then. Because of jealousy, you killed him and even his family. You killed him along with his family. A homicidal maniac like you doesn't deserve to be my disciple." Tang Baiming's pupils shrank as he let out a maniacal laugh. "Yin Fenghua, you finally said that. You didn't accept me not because you don't value our relationship as master and disciple, but because you value it too much. Don't you feel that? You think that I, Tang Baiming, don't deserve to be your disciple." Yin Fenghua frowned, his expression a little ugly. He didn't expect Tang Baiming to be so stubborn. Back then, he insisted on not accepting Tang Baiming as a disciple because he could see that Tang Baiming's stubbornness had become an inner demon. He originally thought that he could help Tang Baiming get rid of his inner demon, and then he would naturally accept Tang Baiming as a disciple. But he didn't expect that Tang Baiming's inner demon was too strong. Not only did his actions not get rid of it, but it also made Tang Baiming's inner demon grow stronger and stronger until that incident happened. Yin Fenghua had no choice but to kill Tang Baiming. He felt guilty about what happened to Tang Baiming. Back then, he taught Tang Baiming because he was a talented swordsman and hoped to groom a real opponent for himself. He didn't expect to groom a murderous maniac. Perhaps he had placed too much hope on Tang Baiming, which led to the latter's stubbornness, which eventually led to a disaster. Yin Fenghua, it was you who created me. Therefore, half of the killing karma on my hands is yours." At this moment, Tang Baiming laughed coldly and shouted, "Do you know who I am now? Is that important?" Yin Fenghua replied coldly, "Of course it is." Tang Baiming smiled again and said, "Because I am now the master of the Qinjian Villa." Yin Fenghua frowned, a little confused. However, Tang Baiming's words shocked everyone. So he is the master of the Qinjian Villa. No wonder he is so strong. The mysterious master of the Qinjian Villa has finally shown up. All these years, The Qinjian villa has been annexing other sword sections. Whether they surrendered or resisted, they were all killed. How cruel! With such a powerful master, no wonder the Qinjian villa is so arrogant. The crowd started discussing, their eyes focused on Tang Baiming with anger and fear. Chapter 4289. Up in the sky, Tang Baiming took a step forward. Immediately, boundless sword essence was released. The surrounding void became solemn and fell into a terrifying, murderous atmosphere. The crowd felt a chill in their hearts. Under the pressure of this sword essence, they could not help but retreat. Nie Tian felt an inexplicable chill in his heart when he felt the murderous aura in the sword essence. The sword essence that Lung Qinxiang released just now was already extremely murderous, but compared to Tang Baiming, it was far inferior. The murderous aura in Tang Baiming's sword essence seemed to have an extremely strong invasive power. It made people feel an uncontrollable shudder from the depths of their souls. It was unimaginable what kind of person could cultivate such a terrifying sword essence. Up in the sky, Yin Fengwu's expression also changed. He could faintly feel that his sword essence was suppressed by Tang Baiming. This discovery gave him quite a shock. One had to know that he was a swordsman at the level of one with the sword. The 7 wounds sword essence he cultivated was definitely at the peak of sword essence. Even yet, Tian broke the 7 wound sword formation by luck. But at this moment, his sword essence was actually suppressed. How could he not be shocked? Yin Fengwu, you must be very surprised. Tang Baiming enjoyed Yin Fengwu's expression. He sneered. The 7 wound sword essence is your capital that you have always been proud of. When you taught me, it was also based on the 7 wound sword essence. Therefore, my sword essence has always carried the shadow of the 7 wounds sword essence. The 7 wound sword essence is the strongest sword essence I have ever come into contact with. Therefore, I always thought that I would not be able to surpass you in this lifetime. But who would have thought that when you killed me, I would comprehend it? Comprehend? Yin Fengwu frowned and said, your sword essence aura has changed. It seems that you did not die. You must have had a fortuitous encounter. Tang Baiming sneered and said, my current sword essence is called 9 kills. It is used to suppress your 7 wounds sword essence. Shameless boasting. Yin Fengwu responded coldly. No one in this world could suppress his sword essence. Sword intents were divided into strong and weak, and at the same time, they were also divided into attributes. Other than some cases where the attributes clashed and there was a restraint between the sword intents, generally speaking, there was no obvious restraint between sword intents. Tang Baiming had actually said that his 9 kills sword intent could counter the 7 wounds sword intent. This was simply an insult to Yin Fengwu. Nie Tian frowned when he heard Tang Baiming's words. He had personally experienced how terrifying the 7 injuries sword will was. He did not believe that there was a sword will that could suppress the 7 injuries sword will. Make your move. Tang Baiming didn't say anything else. His eyes darkened and a green longsword appeared in his hand. Immediately, a dark sword light appeared and surged in the void like a venomous snake probing for something. Yin Fengwu's expression was cold. Tang Baiming was humiliating him by allowing him to make the first move. However, it could be seen from this that Tang Baiming was extremely confident in his sword intent. Tang Baiming, I'll attack first. I'm afraid you won't have a chance to attack. Yin Fengwu shouted coldly. Then, the 7 wound sword will went wild and spread in the void. It directly collided with Tang Baiming's sword intent. Suddenly, the space was filled with the sound of sword intent colliding. At this moment, Yin Fengwu's expression changed. He really found that his sword intent was suppressed. How can this be? Yin Fengwu's eyes narrowed, and he almost screamed. Tang Baiming's sword intent could really suppress the 7 wound sword will. The crowd felt the impact of the sword intent coming from the void, and they were all shocked. These two are too terrifying. They haven't even used their swords. They're just using their sword intent to clash, and yet they have such power. Yeah, I really didn't expect such terrifying swordsmen to exist in the world today. I'm afraid these two are already at the peak of the sword world. The crowd discussed, and they were extremely excited. They were all very powerful swordsmen. Naturally, they could see how powerful Yin Feng Wua and Tang Baiming were. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, many people wouldn't have believed that there were such powerful swordsmen in the world. Nie Tian stood far away in the sky and stared at the two. He was stunned for a few seconds before he reacted. He also realized that the 9-kill sword will could really suppress the 7-wound sword will. This was really unbelievable. Yin Feng Wua was an existence comparable to the Yang God Sword Emperor. Tang Baiming was just the villa master of the Qinjian villa. No matter how talented he was, there was no reason for him to be stronger than Yin Feng Wua. If Tang Baiming was really stronger than Yin Feng Wua, he wouldn't have needed to become Yin Feng Wua's disciple. My dear teacher, I can sense terror from your sword intent. High up in the sky, the wind was fierce and the dark clouds were surging. Tang Baiming's face was gloomy as he laughed maniacally. I really didn't expect that the dignified, selfless sword demon would be afraid of me. I'm afraid. Yin Feng Wua frowned and didn't respond. He had to admit that he was indeed afraid for a moment. However, he wasn't afraid that Tang Baiming was stronger than him. He was afraid that his sword intent was being suppressed by another swordsman. All along, he had thought that his sword intent had reached its limit and was infinitely close to it. It was impossible for it to improve any further. However, now that he was facing Tang Baiming's 9-kill sword will, he suddenly felt that his understanding of sword intent had deviated. This turbulence in his inner world of swordsmanship was the reason why he was so shocked. 9-kill sword will, I have painstakingly comprehended it for 1,000,000 years just for this moment, just to see your shocked expression. Tang Baiming laughed hysterically. Then, he pointed his long sword forward. Suddenly, sword chi surged and a sword shadow appeared. Yin Feng Wua attacked Yin Feng Wua. In an instant, Yin Feng Wua felt an aura pressing towards him. His expression changed and he moved. The long sword behind him appeared, and the sword intent surged like the sea, as though it was going to drown the heavens and earth. Swordsmanship was about sharpness and breaking the surface with a single point. However, at this moment, Yin Feng Wua reversed the situation and broke the surface with a single point. In the next instant, sharpness and power collided. It wasn't a grand scene, but it was as light as a feather. Yin Feng Wua and Tang Baiming's figures trembled slightly, and then they retreated at the same time, each leaving a line of blood in front of them. The atmosphere was silent and oppressive. Countless pairs of eyes stared at the two of them. They had no idea what had happened. After a long time, Tang Baiming's body trembled, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Then, he slowly lifted his black robe and revealed an extremely terrifying face. His face was riddled with holes. If one looked closely, they would see many fine and complicated sword marks. It was as though he had been cursed. Seeing this scene, the crowd could not help but suck in a breath of cold air, and they almost stopped breathing. No wonder Tang Baiming wore a black robe. It turned out that he was trying to hide his terrifying face. I've lost. Tang Baiming steadied himself and stared at Yin Feng Wua. His eyes were filled with unwillingness and resentment. Chapter 4290. Yin Feng Wua did not feel relaxed at all after defeating Tang Baiming with one move. Instead, he felt extremely tired and heavy. It was as if he had fallen into emptiness and was constantly sinking. He felt that he was old, really old. A feeling of a hero in his twilight years struck him, causing his body to tremble slightly. He was like a candle in the wind, extremely sorrowful. The flame that had burned for millions of years in his eyes was extinguished. He had won with his sword, but lost his heart. Just now, when their swords clashed, his heart suddenly trembled. It was like a sharp sword suddenly rusted. He had won because of his cultivation level. If Tang Baiming had been a little stronger, or if he had been a little weaker, the result would have been different. In that instant, he had felt a killing intent. He could not remember how long it had been since he had felt like this. Even when he had fought against the Yang God Sword Emperor, his life had never been threatened. Tang Baiming had lost, but Yin Feng Wua's sword heart had wavered. Ha 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 ha. At this moment, Tang Baiming suddenly laughed maniacally. He could feel fear in Yin Feng Wu's eyes, which gave him a perverted sense of satisfaction. Yin Feng Wu, although I have lost, you and I both know that if my cultivation level was a little higher, you would be a corpse by now. The 7 injuries sword intent that you are so proud of is nothing in front of my sword intent. Tang Baiming laughed maniacally. His eyes were full of contempt. Yin Feng Wu's face was gloomy, and he did not speak. The crowd looked at the scene in front of them in shock. What was going on? The winner was disappointed, but the loser was so arrogant. Big brother, there is no limit to the way of the sword. Even if you stand at the peak, you must keep your sword heart upright. There is no need to be fixated on momentary success or failure. At this moment, a calm voice sounded in Yin Feng Wu's ears. Then, a soft sword force appeared and helped him stabilize his body. He turned around and saw that Nie Tian was looking at him calmly. Yin Feng Wu was stunned. He suddenly felt the light in Nie Tian's eyes and came to a realization. For a long time, he had stood at the peak, often feeling lonely and lonely. He had always wanted to find an opponent. But at this moment, he suddenly understood that he wasn't looking forward to an opponent. Instead, he was afraid that someone would catch up to him and surpass him. Therefore, when Tang Baiming's sword intent suppressed him, it directly impacted his sword heart and caused him to waver. Nie Tian persuaded him with the words, "Keep the sword heart upright," waking him up from his dream. Although Nie Tian was weak, his sword heart was firm and unwavering. It was precisely this sword heart that allowed him to uphold justice and be consistent from beginning to end. Yin Feng Wu calmed down and let out a long breath. His eyes were a little more indifferent. Indistinctly, something in his heart of the sword had changed. Yin Feng Wu, let's do it, Tang Baiming said in a deep voice as he calmed down. His sword intent was stronger than Yin Feng's in Ata, but he still lost this battle. He had persisted for a long time, but what welcomed him in the end was failure. Only he knew the pain in his heart. He didn't want to say anything more. He just wanted to end it quickly. Tang Baiming, I have a lot of responsibility for you becoming like this. As long as you are willing to put down the butcher's knife in your hand, I can spare you, Yin Feng Wu said. Everything between master and disciple would come to an end. Tang Baiming was a rare sword prodigy. Yin Feng Wu couldn't bear to kill him. Brother Yin Feng, when did you become so soft? At this moment, a vigorous voice sounded. Then, a figure landed, causing the heavens and earth to tremble. Yin Feng Wu frowned. He looked up and saw a familiar face. It was Human Emperor Mu Jioga. Human Emperor. At the same time, Tang Baiming's eyes were burning with excitement. Yin Feng Wu frowned when he saw this. He didn't expect Tang Baiming to know Human Emperor. Could it be that Tang Baiming didn't die and was saved by Human Emperor? Tang Baiming stepped down first. Human Emperor landed and smiled faintly, gesturing for Tang Baiming to step back. Tang Baiming acknowledged and retreated to the side respectfully. Yin Feng Wu's face darkened even more. He looked at everything coldly. Tang Baiming was acting like a servant of Human Emperor. Is this guy an elder of the Human Emperor Palace like the Heaven Dao Pavilion Master? Nie Tian speculated as he looked at Tang Baiming from afar. Although Tang Baiming lost to Yin Feng Wu in the battle, he managed to injure him. Therefore, he was not much weaker than Yin Feng and was definitely qualified to be an elder of the Human Emperor Palace. Brother Yin Feng, let's put aside Tang Baiming for now. The most important thing now is to activate the Flower of Death. Then, Human Emperor said loudly, now that most of the people are here, it's time to set the rules. His words immediately caused an uproar in the crowd. Who is this guy? He's so arrogant. Does he really think that he's in charge here? Master Chen Jian was very respectful to him just now and even addressed him as Human Emperor. I wonder who he is. So what if he's Human Emperor? There are so many swordsmen here. Why should he be in charge here? Everyone was indignant as they spoke. Everyone here was powerful and influential. Many of them were even leaders of their own sections. Therefore, they would not listen to anyone else. Human Emperor wanted to set the rules as soon as he appeared. Naturally, everyone was displeased. Silence. The Human Emperor frowned as he spoke. after which a formless energy radiated out, causing everyone's expression to change as they stood there dumbfounded. The invisible force was an extremely terrifying sword chi. It sealed everyone's yuan meridians instantly, like an invisible hand. Some of the weaker swordsmen vomited blood on the spot, while the stronger swordsmen were stunned and their faces turned as white as a sheet. Yet Tion's body trembled slightly, and he almost fell. Fortunately, Yin Fenghua was beside him and helped him stabilize his yuan meridians in time. He did not expect Human Emperor's sword will to be so terrifying. It was much more powerful than Yin Fenghua's. This is Human Emperor's sword curse. Those who are weaker than him will not be able to withstand it. Yin Fenghua sighed softly and said in a low voice, Human Emperor is trying to establish his dominance. It seems like he wants to control everything here. If he controls everything, won't we lose for sure? Yet Tian frowned and asked in shock. Chapter 4291. There was dead silence. Everyone looked at the Ren Huang in the sky with shock and fear. Even though they were all first-class swordsmen, they could not imagine how terrifying a human sovereign was. The sword curse just now had completely awed everyone with the strength of a human sovereign, and they did not dare to act rashly again. The human emperor stood coldly in the sky with disdain in his eyes. A peerless emperor's aura spread out. Then, the human emperor briefly explained the Yellow Spring Holy Land so that everyone had a general understanding of where they were. After listening to Ren Huang's narration, everyone expressed their disbelief. So this place is called the Yellow Springs Holy Land. Why haven't I heard of it before? I heard from the human sovereign that the Yellow Springs flower here can help the swordsman comprehend the way of the sword. How magical! It's true that the Yellow Spring flower can help one comprehend swordsmanship, but it must be extremely risky. I'm afraid that not many people here can successfully comprehend swordsmanship. The crowd discussed in shock. It was the first time for most of them to come to the Yellow Spring Holy Land. Before this, they had no idea that such a mysterious place existed in the world. Everyone, please be quiet. Ren Huang waited for everyone to calm down before he continued. Just as you have said, there's a great risk in comprehending the sword in the Yellow Springs. I might as well tell you that the chance of success is very small. They will be imprisoned by the Yellow Springs flower and slowly devoured. The crowd couldn't help but gasp. They clearly didn't expect that the price of failing to comprehend the sword at the Yellow Springs would be their lives. The human emperor's eyes swept across the audience, and an invisible majesty made the crowd quiet down. He said, the risk of comprehending the sword in the Yellow Springs is great, but the rewards are also great. As long as one could successfully comprehend the sword in the Yellow Springs, the swordsman's sword intent would have a qualitative improvement. More importantly, it can pass. A swordsman who comprehends swordsmanship in the Yellow Springs will definitely be able to reach the legendary realm of being one with the sword. Unity of man and sword. The crowd exclaimed again when they heard this. They were all first-class swordsmen, so they naturally understood what it meant to be one with the sword. These 4 simple words completely stirred up everyone's emotions. Ren Huang had already expected this reaction from the crowd. He smiled faintly and continued, Everyone, please don't get too excited. Not everyone is qualified to participate in the Sword of Hell Enlightenment. Every time the underworld sea of swords opens, there's a limited number of underworld flowers. To comprehend the sword, one must have outstanding strength and talent. When everyone heard this, their expressions changed, and they couldn't help but look around. In their hearts, they understood that the people around them would all become their opponents. Your Majesty, what do we have to do to participate in the Yellow Spring sword comprehension? Just tell us. Someone couldn't help but shout. The Ren Huang smiled faintly and said, This time, I plan to divide the Yellow Spring sword comprehension into 4 stages. The first stage, the opening of the Yellow Spring. The second stage, the Yellow Spring sword chant. The third stage, the Yellow Spring battle. And the fourth stage, the Yellow Spring sword comprehension. Everyone was stunned. They did not really understand what the human emperor meant. The opening of a Yellow Springs flower isn't something that can be done by one person. We need everyone to work together to activate the Yellow Springs Flower's sword intent. The human emperor said calmly. So, in the first stage, I will choose hundreds of swordsmen whose strength is at the level of sword martial artists in St. Fire. Then, we can work together to activate the Yellow Springs Flower. Everyone nodded in agreement. The second stage, Underworld Sword Chant, uses the Underworld Steel to test the swordsman's sword intent. If the sword intent is unable to make the Underworld Steel make a sword chant, it proves that the swordsman is not qualified to participate in the Underworld Sword Comprehension and will be directly eliminated. The swords that helped open the Yellow Springs Flower you don't have to participate in the Yellow Springs Sword Chant and can directly enter the Yellow Springs Struggle. Human Emperor continued to explain. Everyone nodded again. There was no objection. Tian looked at the Human Emperor and expressed his approval of the first two stages arranged by the latter. However, if the third stage of the Yellow Springs Struggle was a battle between swordsmen, he wouldn't stand a chance at all. There were only hundreds of flowers of the Yellow Springs, and there were hundreds of swordsmen who had reached Sword Marshal St. Fire. If this was a normal fight, the one who would eventually gain the right to gain an epiphany of the Yellow Springs would definitely be a powerful warrior. But the talent of these experts in the Sword Dao was not necessarily the best. Many of them were already very old, and there were even some old men with one foot in the grave. Their strength was completely accumulated. The third stage, Yellow Spring Struggle, as the name suggests, is a battle between swordsmen. The Human Emperor's voice rang out again. However, the method of battle is slightly different. This is because the Yellow Spring Sword Comprehension focuses more on the swordsman's talent and not his strength. So Ben, I suggest that all swordsmen participating in the Yellow Spring Struggle should suppress their cultivation levels below the 9th stage of Sword Heavenly Tribulation. His words immediately caused an uproar. Some people were happy, while others were worried. To comprehend the sword in the Yellow Springs, one needs the aptitude of the swordsman. This kind of competition is much fairer. The swordsman who was slightly weaker was clearly very happy. However, the swordsmen at the level of Sword Marshal and St. Fire burst into an uproar. They were incredibly furious. The Yellow Spring Struggle is naturally won by the strong. Forcing others to suppress their strength, what kind of rule is that? That's right. The Underworld Flower was opened by us. Who else is more qualified than us to participate in the Underworld Sword Comprehension? Absolutely not. Since we are strong, why should we compete with these young juniors in sword intent? In the face of the doubts and anger, the Ren Huang did not have much of a reaction. Instead, he looked at the crowd calmly. He had already expected such a situation, so he wasn't anxious. After a while, when everyone had calmed down a little, the human sovereign opened his mouth again and said, "Comprehending the sword of the underworld focuses on the comprehension of the sword intent. If one's sword intent and sword Dao are not enough, entering the flower of the underworld is tantamount to courting death. If you're on the same level, if you can't defeat others under the sword realm, then it proves that your sword intent aptitude is not enough. My suggestion might seem to be to suppress you, but in truth, it's for your own good." The crowd looked at the Ren Huang, and they became even more irritated. "You make it sound nice. We are strong, so why can't we participate in the Yellow Spring Sword Comprehension? Today, I'm going to participate in the Yellow Spring Sword Comprehension. Let's see who dares to stop me. No matter how strong you are, you're just one person. You're too naive to think that you can use your power to suppress others." The Ren Huang's calm voice faded away, but it did not manage to make the powerful warriors calm down. In fact, some of them were eager to attack. The Ren Huang's gaze focused slightly, and a cold glare shone in his eyes. He took a cold step forward, and a great and boundless sword pressure was released, pressing down on the crowd with a loud rumble. In an instant, hundreds of swordsmen at the level of Sword Marshal and St. Fire sensed the great sword pressure, and their expressions changed. They wanted to fight back, but they found that the sword intent in their bodies was completely suppressed, and they could not release it at all. How is this possible? The crowd was shocked, and they looked at the Ren Huang in shock and fear. Chapter 4292. Tian frowned and felt puzzled. Suppressing hundreds of swordsmen in Saint Defire Sword Realm with his own power was probably something even the young God Sword Emperor could not do. What a great human emperor. What a good move. Yin Feng Wuwa curled up the corners of his mouth and mumbled with a smile. It's the sword curse. Tian's eyes focused, and he immediately realized what was going on. He cried out in his heart. He suddenly realized that the reason why Human Emperor could suppress the swordsman was not only because of his extraordinary strength, but also because of the sword curse he had released earlier. It was obvious that the sword curse had the effect of suppressing the swordsman's sword will. These swordsmen could not bring out their true strength, so they were naturally suppressed by Human Emperor. At that moment, Human Emperor moved. He took a step forward, and then a bloody scene appeared. A swordsman exploded and died, turning into a rain of blood. Bang! 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 Then, a series of muffled sounds rang out, and dozens of swordsmen exploded, just like the previous one. Yet Tian's heart trembled, and his face changed. He did not expect Human Emperor to be so brutal that he would kill these people. After all, these swordsmen were at the level of Saint Defire Sword Realm, and some of them were even grandmasters of the sword. He could not accept killing them just like that. It had to be said that Human Emperor's methods were indeed bloody and cruel, and they were very shocking. But Human Emperor did not intend to stop. One swordsman after another died, and in the blink of an eye, more than 100 people had died. Yin Feng Wuwa could not help but frown when he saw this. If he continued killing like this, the flower of the Yellow Spring would not be activated. Finally, someone could not take it anymore and shouted, "Don't kill anymore. I'll listen to you." But as soon as his voice faded away, his body exploded and he died. Then, Human Emperor killed dozens of people before he stopped. Everyone was terrified, and their expressions were dull. They could not react for a long time. None of them expected Human Emperor to be so ruthless and decisive. Human Emperor swept his gaze across the crowd and said coldly, "I like people who abide by the rules. Is there anyone else who wants to challenge my rules?" The surroundings were deathly silent and oppressive. "Very well. If that's the case, then I will assume that you have agreed." The corner of the Run Huang's lips twitched. If anyone dares to break the rules, what happened just now will be the result. Everyone kept quiet out of fear, not daring to breathe loudly. Run Huang nodded in satisfaction and said, "The third stage of the Yellow Springs struggle will determine the top 200 swordsmen. These 200 swordsmen will be the ones who will ultimately participate in the Yellow Springs sword comprehension. Let me remind everyone once again that comprehending the sword in the Yellow Springs is extremely risky. It's not too late to back out." Everyone had a solemn look on their faces, and none of them were willing to leave. Even if they knew that it was a bottomless abyss in front of them, once they crossed the abyss, they would be able to see the bright wind and clear moon. Who would give up such an opportunity? The matter of comprehending the sword in the Yellow Springs was decided by the Human Emperor alone. Following that, the Human Emperor stated some other rules and selected more than 100 swordsmen to be the initiators of the Yellow Springs flower. The rest of the people could familiarize themselves with the Yellow Springs holy land before the Yellow Springs swording began. Although Tian was dissatisfied with the Human Emperor's methods, he was still very satisfied with the decision. During the Yellow Springs struggle, all the swordsmen's realms were suppressed to below the 9th level of Sword Heavenly Disaster. For Tian, who was only in the first level of Sword Heavenly Disaster, this was still a great disadvantage, but it was already the best situation. If it was a normal battle, he would not be able to defeat a swordsman at Saint Defire Sword Martial Artist level. At that moment, the Human Emperor came to Yin Feng Wu's side and said with a faint smile, "Brother Yin Feng, when the Yellow Springs flower opens, you and I will take the lead. The others will assist us." Of course. Yin Feng Wu nodded slightly in agreement. Both of them were swordsmen who had become one with the sword, but in terms of strength, Yin Feng Wu was weaker than the Human Emperor. However, the Human Emperor was also wary of Yin Feng Wu, or else he would not have been so polite. Tian guessed that if the Human Emperor really wanted to fight to the death with Yin Feng Wu, The most likely result would be that one of them would die and the other would be injured. The one who would die would be Infeng Wuwa, but the human emperor would definitely be heavily injured. The two of them were wary of each other and maintained a superficial peace. The human emperor smiled faintly and left. Nie Tian calmed down and looked around, but he did not find Lung Huang Jishue. It seems that she is hiding from me. Nie Tian sighed in his heart and could not help but feel a little disappointed. Nie Tian, do you know that girl just now? Infeng Wuwa had already seen Nie Tian's actions and could not help but ask. She is my friend. Nie Tian forced a smile. That girl has a strong background. If I am not wrong, she should be from the Three Lives clan that has disappeared for a long time. Infeng Wuwa's eyes darkened slightly as he said, Big brother, you know about the Three Lives clan? Nie Tian's eyes trembled and he asked in surprise. I know a little, but I don't know much. Infeng Wuwa smiled faintly and clearly did not intend to continue. Instead, he said, Nie Tian, don't be distracted. Prepare for the fight in the Yellow Springs. That young human emperor's talent is not inferior to the current human emperor. If he succeeds in comprehending the sword in the Yellow Springs, you will be in danger. I know. Nie Tian nodded. Naturally, he understood that Infeng Wuwa was worried that Lung Huang Jishue would affect him. Nie Tian. At this moment, suddenly, a familiar voice rang out, and Nie Tian was pleasantly surprised. He suddenly turned around and saw a very familiar face. It was Crimson Life Loyal Heart. Why are you here? Crimson Life Loyal Heart was also very excited and looked at Nie Tian with surprise. It's a long story. Nie Tian smiled bitterly, and his expression was a little bitter. He really did not expect that Crimson Life Loyal Heart would also come here. This is... Crimson Life Loyal Heart calmed down a little and could not help but look at Infeng Wuwa next to him. His face was full of shock, and his voice was trembling. He was also a peak swordsman, and he had reached the 9th tier of Saint D Fire. Naturally, he could see how terrifying Infeng Wuwa was. He had just come to the holy land of Yellow Springs, and he did not expect to meet such a terrifying swordsman. He is my sworn brother. Nie Tian smiled and said, Infeng Wuwa. Infeng Wuwa nodded and said. His eyes were fixed on the young man behind the Crimson Life Loyal Heart. Of course, Nie Tian recognized this young man. He was none other than Yu Jingshan, who was born with a sword embryo. Nie Tian had fought with Yu Jingshan in the Hidden Dragon struggle before, so he knew how powerful the latter was. Most importantly, Yu Jingshan was born with a sword embryo, and he was a peerless sword genius. So far, among the swordsmen that Nie Tian knew, there were only two who had an innate sword embryo. One was the legendary young god sword emperor of the sword world, and the other was Yu Jingshan. Chapter 4293. Yu Jingshan's face stiffened as Infeng Wuwa stared at him. He felt a terrifying sword intent surging in his body, like an invisible hand probing everything about him. However, this sword intent only made him feel fear, not discomfort. Senior Infeng, the Scarlet Life Danhart could not help but frown when he saw Infeng's strange expression. Just as he was about to speak, he was stopped by the latter. Infeng Wuwa stared at Yu Jingshan, and a fiery light flickered in his eyes. He was like an artist admiring a rare work of art. Nie Tian looked at the Scarlet Life Dan Xin and signaled the latter not to be nervous. Infeng Wuwa was only curious about Yu Jingshan and would never harm him. After a long time, Infeng Wuwa finally calmed down, but he suddenly laughed and said, I really didn't expect that there is someone in this world who has an innate sword embryo that is stronger than the Yang spirit. The Scarlet Life Dan Xin was shocked and speechless. Of course, he knew that the Yang god Infeng Wuwa mentioned was the legendary Yang god, sword emperor of the sword world. When the Yang god had appeared in the Hidden Dragon competition, he had witnessed its extraordinary talent with his own eyes and was shocked. However, Infeng Wuwa had said that Yu Jingshan's sword embryo was stronger than his Yang spirit. How could he not be shocked? Nie Tian was also shocked and was stunned for a few seconds. In today's world, perhaps no one knew the Yang god better than Infeng Wuwa. The two of them were old enemies and best friends who had fought against each other countless times. Therefore, These words must be true from Wu's mouth. If I'm not mistaken, your sword embryo has just awakened not long ago, and there were some changes in the process, right? Wu looked at Yu Jingchen and asked solemnly. Yu Jingchen nodded, as if he wanted to say something, but he held himself back. Back then, his sword embryo was suppressed by the Scarlet Life Dan Hart, but the Scarlet Life Dan Hart did not know much about the innate sword embryo. In the end, the seal caused the sword embryo to mutate, and when the sword embryo awakened, it almost killed Yu Jingchen. However, this was also a blessing in disguise for Yu Jingchen. After the mutation, his sword embryo was several times stronger than an ordinary sword embryo. The sword embryo has just awakened, but it has already displayed such terrifying potential. How terrifying! Wu exclaimed. Then he sighed. Unfortunately, you shouldn't have come here. Shouldn't come? Red Life Dan Xian frowned and looked puzzled. What? Yu Jingchen was also puzzled, and he asked in astonishment. Tian's pupils shrank as he thought of something, and his expression changed. Human Emperor. Yu Jingchen was an innate sword embryo, and his talent was even more terrifying than the young God Sword Emperors. This would undoubtedly attract the human sovereign's attention. Since human sovereign wanted to kill Rui Qinyu, he would also kill Yu Jingchen. If Yu Jingchen came here, he would be like a lamb walking into a tiger's den. Senior Scarlet Life, please leave with Yu Jingchen, Tian said as he looked at the Scarlet Life Dan Hart. This? The Red Life Dan Hart was stunned and couldn't react for a while. In fact, they had come to the Yellow Springs Holy Land because Yu Jingchen had sensed the aura of the Yellow Springs Sword Ocean. Although the Scarlet Life Dan Hart was stronger, Yu Jingchen's talent was better, and his sword sense was stronger. That was why he could sense the Yellow Springs Sword Ocean. Yu Jingchen had already sensed the aura of the Yellow Springs flower, and he was very excited. If they wanted him to leave now, there must be a reason. Tian wanted to explain, but he was stopped by Wu. The latter said, "They are already here, and human sovereign should have sensed it. If we leave now, not only will they not be safe, but they will also be in danger." Tian furrowed his brows, and his expression immediately turned ugly. Human sovereign has already set the rules. They should be safe in the Yellow Springs Holy Land. Wu said calmly. Moreover, I don't think human sovereign will kill an innate sword embryo swordsman so easily. Big brother, do you mean to let Yu Jingchen continue to comprehend the sword in the Yellow Springs? Tian asked worriedly. Yes. Wu nodded and said, Don't worry, I will protect him. Tian had a helpless look on his face, but he could only agree. This was the Yellow Springs Holy Land, and with human sovereign status, he would not attack Yu Jingchen openly. If he really wanted to harm Yu Jingchen, the most likely way was to let Lin Fan do it. At this time, Yu Jingchen's strength and realm were the same as Tian's, and his combat power should be similar. However, Lin Fan was a young human sovereign, and his strength was still unknown. For Tian and Yu Jingchen, he was a great threat. Tian, what are you talking about? Scarlet Life Loyal Heart frowned and asked, Senior Scarlet Life, there are some things that I can't say. Tian did not explain too much, but he reminded Scarlet Life Loyal Heart, Senior Scarlet Life, there are some things that I can't say. From now on, you have to pay more attention to that human sovereign. Senior Donghuang's death had a lot to do with him. Scarlet Life Loyal Heart's expression suddenly changed, and a sword will surged in his body. He was obviously a little excited. Tian signaled him not to be impulsive and said, Since you have come to the Yellow Springs Holy Land, don't think too much. Just focus on comprehending the swordsmanship of the Yellow Springs. Scarlet Life Loyal Heart calmed down and nodded. In the next few days, Tian and Yu Jingchen cultivated together, actively sensing the aura of the flower of Yellow Springs, hoping to make a breakthrough. Soon, half a month had passed, and the underworld sword sea had shrunk to a swordwell vortex that was a few meters wide, and it was about to completely close. At this time, all the swordsmen gathered in the sky above the valley, waiting for the flower of Yellow Springs to open. Yet Tian and the others gathered outside the valley, far away from the underworld sword sea. As for the hundreds of people who opened the underworld sword sea, they were arranged according to a sword array, each guarding their own position. The sword array stretched for dozens of meters, and in the center were the two major array eyes. The human sovereign and Yin Feng Wua stood there like two sharp swords. Begin! The human sovereign glanced at the crowd, then nodded to Yin Feng Wua and said loudly, "Boom! Boom!" As soon as he finished speaking, the human sovereign and Yin Feng Wua released their sword will at the same time. Suddenly, two sword rays shot into the sky, and the aura of a wild dragon shook the surroundings, causing the surrounding void to tremble. Boom! 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 Then, the other swordsmen released their sword will, and countless sword rays rushed like thousands of beasts, trying to drown the world. These people are really strong. Tian was shocked when he felt the sword will aura in the sword array. The swordsmen in the sword array were the strongest swordsmen in the world, and they represented the peak of swordsmanship in the holy world. The scene of hundreds of peak-level swordsmen releasing their sword will at the same time was really shocking. Chapter 4294. Under the underworld sword ocean, hundreds of yellow springs flowers bloomed. Sword chi soared into the sky, and sword intent filled the air. Everyone felt as if they were bathing in a waterfall of sword intent. All the swordsmen were shocked, and they felt as if they were in a dream. As for the swordsmen in the sword formation, the impact of the sword intent they felt was far greater than that of the swordsmen outside the sword formation. They could more deeply comprehend the terrifying sword intent contained in the flower of the yellow springs. The sword aura that seemed to be able to penetrate the soul made they were shocked beyond words. At this moment, everyone felt as if all the pores on their bodies had opened up. It was as if they were dry land that was greedily sucking in the nourishment of the sword intent. Although Tian was outside the sword formation, he could clearly feel the resonance of the sword intent. The sword intent in his body continued to grow stronger, allowing him to break through to a higher realm. However, the aura of the yellow springs flowers soon weakened, and the sword intent in the surrounding void also gradually stabilized. The entire area was still enveloped by the majestic sword intent. Tian let out a long breath and calmed himself down. He could not help but smile faintly. After being stimulated by the yellow springs sword intent, his sword principal realm had broken through from the first stage of sword heavenly tribulation to the second stage. Although it was only a small advancement, he was extremely happy. After all, he was going to face many powerful swordsmen in the future. Hence, every advancement was extremely important to him, and it could even decide his life or death. Yu Jingshan, who was beside him, was equally happy. Tian looked at Yu Jingshan and felt the aura of the latter's sword intent. His expression changed, and he was shocked. He had never expected that Yu Jingshan would break through from the first stage of sword heavenly tribulation to the fourth stage of sword heavenly tribulation. It was an increase of 3 small realms. Under the same circumstances, Yu Jingshan's advancement was actually 3 times faster than Tian's. Yu Jingshan naturally knew what Tian was thinking. He smiled faintly and said with some embarrassment, "This sword intent seems to have a great impact on my sword embryo. I didn't expect it to break through so much." The corners of Tian's mouth twitched, and he smiled faintly. Yu Jingshan was an innate sword embryo, and it had undergone an unexpected mutation. Hence, he was naturally not an ordinary swordsman. "Everyone, the Yellow Springs flower has opened. Let's leave for now." At that moment, the human emperor's voice rang out, and the hundreds of swordsmen in the sword formation all retreated, leaving the range of the flower of the netherworld. "Tian, how are you?" Yin Feng Wua came to Tian's side and asked excitedly. Tian couldn't help but smile as he looked at Yu Jingshan. Yin Feng Wua immediately noticed the changes in Yu Jingshan, and he couldn't help but exclaim, as expected of the innate sword embryo, "It's really amazing." He hadn't expected Yu Jingshan to improve so much. "Look, what's that?" Right at this moment, Yu Jingshan seemed to be attracted by something, and he couldn't help but exclaim as he stared at the center of the yellow springs flower. And yet Tian and the others were startled, and they followed Yu Jingchen's gaze. Sure enough, a yellow springs flower was undergoing a strange transformation. Compared to the other yellow springs flowers, this yellow springs flower was obviously much larger, and its petals were brighter and more dazzling. Circles of light surrounded it like a sword halo. At the center of the flower, a crimson vortex slowly surged out, and it looked like a sprout had drilled out of the ground, giving off a strong sense of life. What's that? The others also noticed this unusual yellow springs flower, and they all exclaimed in surprise. Big brother, what's going on? Nie Tian became cold, and he couldn't help but look at Yin Feng Wua. This wasn't the first time Yin Feng Wua had come to the Yellow Springs Holy Land, and he should know what was happening. Yin Feng Wua was also puzzled, and he shook his head as he said, I've never seen something like this before. It's too strange. There were big and small yellow springs flowers, and their colors and auras were different. But overall, there wasn't much difference. For example, this yellow springs flower was several times larger than the other flowers, and its color was too bright. Its aura seemed different as well, and it was really abnormal. Could it be that this yellow springs flower has mutated? Scarlet Life, Loyal Heart frowned and murmured. It's possible. Yin Feng Wu's eyes narrowed, and he was extremely excited. A warrior's bloodline could mutate, and naturally, the yellow springs flower could also mutate. At this moment, the abnormality of this yellow springs flower was indeed like some kind of mutation, and it was obviously a stronger kind of mutation. No, this aura is not right. However, at this moment, Yu Jingchen seemed to have made a terrible discovery, and his face was full of shock. He shook his head repeatedly, and it was obvious that he was a little scared. Jingchen, did you find something? Scarlet Life Loyal Heart knew that Yu Jingchen's sword sense was far stronger than that of an ordinary swordsman, and his perception of the sword's aura was especially sensitive. Perhaps even some peak swordsmen were far inferior to him. The sword embryo was a manifestation of extreme talent and sword principle. A swordsman was like an innate sword body, and his sword sense was far superior to that of an ordinary person. Although Yu Jingchen's cultivation level was not high, his sword sense was probably the strongest among everyone present. Even Human Emperor and Yin Feng Wua might not be able to beat him. At this moment, Yu Jingchen's reaction was obviously that he had discovered something terrifying. Yu Jingchen stammered and said, I sensed an unusual aura. Huh? Nie Tian frowned, and his face was full of surprise. What kind of aura could make Yu Jingchen so frightened that his words were trembling? Jingchen, what is this aura? Scarlet Life Loyal Heart asked anxiously. This time, before Yu Jingchen could speak, Yin Feng Wu's face changed, and he exclaimed, It's a human's aura. A human's aura? Nie Tian and Scarlet Life Loyal Heart exclaimed at the same time. If it was not for Yin Feng Wu's solemn expression, they would have thought that they had heard wrong. There was a human's aura in the Yellow Springs flower. How is this possible? The Yellow Springs flower had just opened, and it had been in a closed state before. Could it be that someone had been hiding in the Yellow Springs flower? It's a human's aura. Yu Jingchen nodded, and his eyes trembled as he said, And this aura, I seem to have encountered it somewhere before. Nie Tian and Scarlet Life Loyal Heart were shocked again. Could it be that Yu Jingchen knew the person hiding in the Yellow Springs flower? Could it be that he is the legendary? At this moment, Yin Feng Wua seemed to have thought of something, and his face changed. He was stunned for a few seconds before he said, The son of Yellow Springs. The son of Yellow Springs? Nie Tian and the others were stunned again, and they had no idea what Yin Feng Wua was talking about. Look, there's someone. Immediately, a burst of exclamations sounded, and everyone's eyes were fixed on the Yellow Springs flower. In the center of the Yellow Springs flower, a figure slowly emerged and walked out of the red vortex. Everyone stared blankly, and they were shocked by the scene in front of them. Chapter 4295. Mori Shire. The person who had walked out of the flower of the Netherworld was actually Mori Shire. This was something that Nie Tian had never expected. No wonder Yu Jingqian had said that he had encountered this aura before. Could it be that Mori Shire was the son of the netherworld that Yin Feng Wua had mentioned? What did the son of the netherworld mean? Although Nyetian had interacted with Mori Shire many times, he did not know much about him. He only knew that Mori Shire had been born from the evil heart of all evil. He had taken over the body of the original owner of the evil heart, the son of all evil, and became the current Mori Shire. Moreover, Mori Shire had helped him many times. Whether it was with good or bad intentions, he had indeed helped him in times of crisis. During the Hidden Dragon battle, Mori Shire had revealed his shocking identity. Even the devil son of the devil race, Xiao Wanjie, had to be respectful to him. Mori Shire's identity had always been a secret. However, Nyetian did not expect that the latter would appear in the netherworld holy ground and be called the son of the netherworld by Yin Feng Wua. Look, that person is coming out. At this moment, the crowd exclaimed. Countless pairs of eyes were focused on Mori Shire, and they looked extremely shocked. Mori Shire walked out of the flower of the netherworld step by step. His body seemed to be connected with the sword intent in the void. With every step he took, the surrounding void shook as if it was going to tear the world apart. With every step he took, swords appeared. Light and shadow intertwined. It was so beautiful that it looked like a dream. When Doomsday 12 reached the sky, everyone's expression was sluggish. They looked at him with incomparable reverence, as if they were looking at a true god. However, Nyetian frowned. He suppressed the shock in his heart and carefully sensed the aura of Mori Shire. The current Mori Shire was very different from before. Nyetian couldn't sense the slightest bit of the 10,000 evil hearts aura from his body. How is this possible? Nyetian was puzzled. He was very sure that the person in front of him was Mori Shire, but why didn't the latter have any evil heart aura? Nyetian was also a possessor of the core of heaven and earth, so he was very sensitive to the aura of the evil heart. It was impossible for Mori Shire to hide the aura of the evil heart so perfectly. Nyetian, do you know him? Yin Feng Wua frowned and asked when he saw Nyetian's strange expression. Nyetian took a deep breath to calm himself down and nodded. Yin Feng Wu's expression changed drastically. It seemed like something big had happened. At this moment, Mori Shire was already standing high up in the sky, looking down on everyone like a god. His eyes were filled with disdain, and his aura was like that of a monarch. Everyone was stunned and couldn't react for a long time. Who are you? At this moment, Ren Huang finally spoke. His face was solemn and cold. Doomsday 12 didn't pay any attention to him. His eyes swept across the crowd before finally landing on Nyetian. He laughed loudly and said, Nyetian, you've finally come. Nyetian frowned. He didn't understand what Mori Shire meant. However, since Mori Shire had spoken, it undoubtedly proved his identity. This made Nyetian feel more at ease. It seems like we can't escape the entanglement of fate. Mori Shire smiled bitterly. He felt helpless. Nyetian's frown deepened. He felt that the Mori Shire in front of him was different from before. This change wasn't in appearance or behavior, but on a deeper level. It was like a change in the soul. He even felt that Mori Shire might have been possessed again. On the other side, Ren Huang, who was ignored, looked gloomy. He didn't make a move and didn't speak anymore. As Ren Huang, a supreme being, no one had ever dared to look down on him. However, Mori Shire looked like a junior. It was naturally inappropriate for a Ren Huang to make a move against a junior in front of so many swordsmen. Moreover, Ren Huang had a feeling that if he were to make a move now, he might not be able to hurt Mori Shire. He sensed an unusually strong power from Mori Shire. It seemed that Mori Shire had a mysterious connection with the Yellow Springs Holy Land. Only then did Mori Shire look at Ren Huang and say indifferently, Lord Ren Huang, continue comprehending the Yellow Springs sword. I won't disturb you. Although he had been in the Yellow Springs flower the entire time, he knew everything that had happened here. Who are you? Ren Huang asked again with a gloomy face. Just like you, I'm also a swordsman who came here to comprehend the sword. However, I'm luckier than you. I've already finished comprehending the sword. Mori Shire nodded and smiled. Rin Huang's eyes were cold. He clearly didn't believe Mori Shire's words, but he didn't say anything else. Comprehending the Yellow Springs sword was not something that could be easily comprehended. Just opening the Yellow Springs flower required hundreds of peak swordsmen to work together. Even if Mori Shire came to the Yellow Springs Holy Land in advance, he couldn't open the Yellow Springs flower alone. In the sacred world, no one had the ability to open the Yellow Springs flower alone. Even the Yang God Sword Emperor couldn't do it. However, Mori Shire had indeed walked out of the Yellow Springs flower. His identity was really puzzling. Then, Mori Shire didn't say anything more. He turned into a ray of sword light and left. Everyone was stunned. They wanted to feel from Mori Shire's aura, but there was no trace of him at all. It was as if he had never appeared. Immediately, the crowd was in an uproar. Who was that guy? How did he walk out of the Yellow Springs flower? That person's aura of sword intent is extremely strong. Has he already comprehended the sword in Yellow Springs? Hasn't comprehending the sword in Yellow Springs sword yet? How did he enter the Yellow Springs flower? Everyone discussed. They had no idea what had just happened. Look, that Yellow Springs flower has withered. Right at this moment, someone noticed something and cried out in alarm. Everyone looked closely. The Yellow Springs flower that Mori Shire had walked out of had indeed withered. It quickly withered, then turned into sword intent and disappeared. Tian frowned. Did this mean that Mori Shire had successfully comprehended the sword? He really is the son of Yellow Springs. In Fenghua, who had been silent for a long time, finally said in a daze, "Son of Yellow Springs? What is that?" Tian could not help but ask in confusion. In Fenghua fell silent for a while and finally calmed down a lot. He let out a long breath and said, "In the beginning of the primeval times, there were two great prophecies of the end of the world. One was the 10 annihilations of the evil woman, and the other was the Yellow Springs doomsday." Chapter 4296. Yellow Springs Blood Sea, Doomsday Descends. Hearing these words, Tian's eyes narrowed in shock. He did not expect the Yellow Springs doomsday to be a prophecy that coexisted with the 10 annihilations of the evil woman. No wonder In Fenghua reaction was so abnormal. However, judging from the human sovereign's reaction, it seemed that he did not know about the Yellow Springs doomsday. After all, the Yellow Springs doomsday was a prophecy from the ancient Ghost clan. The human sovereign was not a member of the Ghost clan, so it was normal that he did not know about it. However, what made Tian feel strange was that the human sovereign had clearly sensed the threat of Mori Shire. Why did he not make a move? Was he afraid of something? Big brother, what does the son of Yellow Springs represent? Tian became cold and asked In Fenghua. In Fenghua shook his head and did not say much. Instead, he asked, "Tian, how do you know this Mori Shire?" Tian frowned and did not hide anything. He immediately told In Fenghua about how he met Mori Shire. Born from the heart of evil. In Fenghua's eyes lit up as he murmured and fell into deep thought. Tian did not know what In Fenghua was thinking and did not dare to disturb him. The Scarlet Life Loyal Heart and Yu Jingchen did not know what was going on and could only watch quietly. "Tian, do you think Mori Shire is different from before?" In Fenghua asked carefully after a while. "Yes." Tian nodded and said, "When I saw Mori Shire this time, I did not feel the aura of the heart of evil from him. Moreover, I always feel that he is a different person, like..." As he spoke, Tian could not describe the feeling in his heart. Reason told him that the person in front of him was indeed Mori Shire, but he was definitely not the Mori Shire from before. There was a deep change in him. "I feel that the previous Mori Shire soul was incomplete, but now it has become complete." Yu Jingchen stepped forward and said, just as Tian did not know what to say. "Yes, that's the feeling." Tian's eyes lit up, and he immediately nodded. Yu Jingchen's words enlightened him, and he immediately understood. In the past, Doomsday 12 had indeed felt incomplete. Now, however, it had become complete. Yu Jingchen had also seen the 12 apocalypses before. Although he had not interacted much with them, his sword sense was extremely strong, and he could perceive things that ordinary people could not. For him to say those words just now, he must have discovered that Apocalypse 12 soul was different from an ordinary person's. In Feng Wua frowned and remained silent for a long time before he said, "His soul should be incomplete now." "What do you mean?" Yet Tian and the others could not help but be stunned. They did not understand what In Feng Wua meant. 3 souls of the Yellow Springs. In Feng Wua said in a deep voice, "Legend has it that the son of the Yellow Springs has 3 souls. The 3 souls can be in one body or in separate bodies. The Mori Shire you saw before should only be in the state of 1 soul. Now, Mori Shire should be in the state of 2 souls, but his complete form should be when the 3 souls merge into one." Nie Tian's expression flickered with astonishment. He had heard of 1 soul with 2 bodies before, but it was the first time he had heard of someone like Mori Shire who had 3 souls. According to common sense, 1 soul should correspond to 1 person, so the 3 souls should correspond to 3 people. Could it be that the 3 souls of Mori Shire had some special connection? We must not let him leave the Yellow Springs Holy Land alive. In Feng Wua's eyes suddenly darkened and revealed his killing intent. Why? Isn't he from the Ghost Clan? Nie Tian was shocked again and confused. Since Mori Shire and Rui Qinyu were both prophesied by the Ghost Clan, then he should be from the Ghost Clan. Why did In Feng Wua want to kill him? The Yellow Springs bloodline originated from the Ghost Clan, but it is the reverse bloodline of the Ghost Clan. It is also known as the Ghost Hunter bloodline. Their clansmen survive by hunting and devouring other Ghost Clan members. In Feng Wua sighed and said, "A long time ago, the 4 bloodlines of the Ghost Clan joined hands to kill the Yellow Springs bloodline. Strangled, their clansmen were slaughtered to the last. Therefore, the prophecy about the Yellow Springs doomsday was gradually forgotten by the Ghost Clan. I didn't expect that although the Yellow Springs bloodline was slaughtered, the Yellow Springs doomsday was still inevitable. The legendary son of Yellow Springs actually appeared in the Yellow Springs Holy Land." Nie Tian's face tightened. He could clearly feel that In Feng Wua's body was slightly trembling. The Yellow Springs doomsday was terrifying for In Feng Wua to be like this. If the son of Yellow Springs is not killed, it will bring the Ghost Clan a disaster. In Feng Wua's face was gloomy, and the killing intent in his eyes became more intense. "Big brother, you said that the current Mori Shire is still in the state of 2 souls. You should not be strong, right?" Nie Tian asked with a frown as he thought of In Feng Wua's words. "Yes." In Feng Wua nodded, but there was no joy on his face. He said, "Rumor has it that the 3 souls of the son of Yellow Springs cannot be destroyed. Mori Shire's martial physique is not strong, but it will require special methods to destroy his 3 souls. I don't know much about the son of Yellow Springs. If I act rashly, not only will I not be able to kill him, but I will also make him more vigilant." 3 souls undying? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. It seemed that the situation was more complicated than he thought. The son of Yellow Springs, who was on par with the 10 Annihilation Evil Woman, was not that easy to kill. After a while, In Feng Wua let out a long sigh and looked at Nie Tian. "Let's not think too much for now. Let's prepare for the Yellow Springs struggle." The son of Yellow Springs appeared too suddenly. It was very troublesome, but the most important thing now was the Yellow Springs struggle. Nie Tian must not lose. 3 days later, in the sky above the Yellow Springs Holy Land, a black steel that was thousands of meters tall appeared. It floated in the void like a giant. This black steel was the Yellow Springs steel. At this time, everyone stood around a Yellow Springs steel, their eyes focused on the steel. The Yellow Springs steel was completely black. It looked very smooth from afar, but if one looked closely, they would find that the steel was engraved with dense sword patterns that were extremely complicated and exquisite. These sword patterns were used to absorb the sword intent of the swordsman and test it. Only a swordsman with a very strong sword intent could trigger the Yellow Springs sword chant of the Yellow Springs steel. "Everyone, let's begin." The human emperor stood on the Yellow Springs steel and glanced at the crowd. He did not waste any time and said directly, "I'll go first." As soon as he finished speaking, a rough voice was heard. Then a figure stepped out. The sword intent around him surged like wild sand, extremely violent. What a strong sword intent! Nietion's eyes darkened slightly. He looked at the swordsman and could not help but be shocked. Chapter 4297. High up in the sky, the sword transformed into a ray of light. Like an arrow released from a bow, it headed straight for the monument of Hades. Puffed. The shadow of the sword fell, but it was like a clay ox entering the sea. It sank into the monument. Everyone's eyes were heated as they stared at the monument of Hades. However, the monument did not react at all, nor did it make any sound. No reaction? Yet Tion frowned, finding it hard to believe. One should know that the person who attacked was a swordsman at the inverse sword consciousness level. To be able to reach this level, the person's talent in swordsmanship was naturally not bad. How could such a person not cause the monument of Hades to resonate? How could everyone not be surprised? How is this possible? The person who attacked was stunned. Then he reacted and shouted. Then he attacked several more times. However, every attack was the same as before. The monument of Hades did not react at all. This is impossible. The person was clearly enraged. He growled and the sword in his body surged. He was going to attack the monument of Hades with all his strength. However, the next moment, he felt an ocean-like power pressing down on him. It crushed his sword. His body trembled, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. "You have failed. Leave this place." In the sky, the Emperor's cold voice was heard. It was domineering that could not be disobeyed. The person was unwilling, but he did not dare to act presumptuously anymore. He moved and left through a gate of Hades not far away. Next, the Emperor's face was cold. He glanced at the crowd and said indifferently. Everyone looked at the monument of Hades, and many began to hesitate. This monument is so strange. That person has already reached the inverse sword consciousness level, but he cannot cause the monument to resonate. I think the monument is strange. I'm afraid the Emperor has done something to it. It cannot be activated at all. Let's wait and see. There's no rush. The crowd was discussing. Some people were involuntarily retreating. Let me. Just then, a clear voice was heard. Then, a young swordsman appeared. He carried an azure long sword on his back and looked extremely sharp. He did not hesitate. He did not even draw his sword. He simply released a wave of sword intent that gushed towards the monument of Hades. In the next moment, when the sword landed on the monument of the yellow spring, a booming sound like a great bell rang out, shaking the clouds. Everyone's eyes trembled violently as they stood rooted to the ground, thinking that they had misheard. This young swordsman was clearly only at the sword tribulation realm. So how could he so easily trigger the underworld sword cry? And yet Tion's lips curled into a smile as he mumbled, "Looks like this stone tablet is indeed extraordinary. It can accurately judge a swordsman's talent and sword will." The young swordsman's strength was indeed a far cry from that person's, but his sword intent was much stronger than that person's. Just as the mortal emperor had said, the yellow spring steel tested a swordsman's sword intent aptitude, not his strength. "You passed." The human emperor looked at the swordsman and nodded slightly. "Thank you, your majesty." The swordsman bowed and retreated to the side. With this person's success, everyone became active and began to take tests one after another. Half a day later, half of them had completed the test. The yellow spring steel had very high requirements for sword will. Among the more than 10,000 swordsmen who took the test, less than 1 in 10 had passed. And among those who passed the test, there was someone with a very high talent in sword will. He even triggered a second resonance of the yellow spring steel. When his sword fell, there were 2 sword cries. "It's him." At this time, Tion saw a familiar figure. It was the young human emperor, Lin Fan. His eyes couldn't help but become fiery. He wanted to see how strong this young human emperor's sword will was. Lin Fan stood coldly in the air. His whole body surged with sword will and suddenly shot into the yellow spring steel. Buzz! Immediately, the yellow spring steel reacted. It let out a clear sword cry that pierced through the clouds and cracked stones. What a clean sword cry! Nietion's expression changed slightly, and he was shocked. The previous swordsmen who triggered the yellow spring steel's resonance were mostly roaring, not as clear as Lin Fan's. This undoubtedly meant that Lin Fan's sword was much purer than the others. Buzz! Immediately after, a second sword cry was heard. It was much longer than the previous one, and it sounded like a great bell. Amazing! Nietion's heart shook, and he couldn't help but say, just these two sword cries were enough to prove that Lin Fan's sword was far superior to others. He was definitely at the peak of aptitude. Everyone was also shocked, and the way they looked at Lin Fan changed. They were filled with envy and fear. But this time, the yellow spring steel shook a little, and then it let out a third sword cry. It was more powerful than the second one, and the sound lingered for a long time. Everyone couldn't help but gasp. Their expressions were dull, and they were completely speechless. Previously, the swordsman with the best sword could only trigger a second resonance. But Lin Fan actually triggered a third resonance. It was really terrifying. If Lin Fan was far superior to other swordsmen before, he was still at the same level. But now he had transcended others and stood alone at a higher level. He actually has heaven-level sword will. No wonder he can become the young human emperor. In Fengwu looked at Lin Fan and couldn't help but exclaim, heaven-level sword will. Nietion frowned, a little puzzled. The yellow spring steel resonates. The first sword cry is the cry of a human and could trigger human-level sword will. The second sword cry is the cry of the earth, and it can trigger earth-level sword will. The third sword cry is the cry of the sky, and it can trigger heaven-level sword will. In Fengwu's eyes darkened. He explained, I originally thought that this young human emperor's sword will aptitude should be below that of the human emperor. Now it seems that he is even more terrifying than the human emperor back then. Nietion's eyes narrowed slightly, and he asked, could it be that the human emperor back then only had earth-level sword will? In Fengwu shook his head and said, the human emperor also triggered the cry of the sky, but the sound of the sword cry was much worse than that of the young human emperor. I speculate that this young human emperor's sword will aptitude is comparable to that of the young spirit back then. Nietion's face stiffened, and he was somewhat speechless. Lin Fan didn't have a congenital sword embryo, but his sword will aptitude was comparable to that of the young spirit. It could be seen that his talent was terrifying. Nietion's sword was inferior to In Fengwu's, so how could he talk about the young spirit? Nietion, go and give it a try. In Fengwu looked at Nietion, his eyes full of expectation. He didn't expect Nietion to surpass Lin Fan, but he couldn't be too far behind. Okay. Nietion nodded slightly and prepared to take the test. But before he moved, a crimson sword light appeared in the sky, like a flame, and sank into the yellow spring steel. Nietion's eyes trembled, and he immediately recognized that this sword came from Lung Huang Jishue. Chapter 4298. The crisp sword chime from the monument of the yellow spring stunned everyone present. They looked at the huge monument in astonishment. All the previous swordsmen had triggered the sword chime of the yellow spring. They were either low, vigorous, or clear. No one had ever made the monument of the yellow spring make such a crisp sound. This cracking sound was like a huge ice surface suddenly cracking open, causing people to involuntarily feel a sense of panic. If it weren't for the fact that the monument of the yellow spring did not shake, everyone would have thought that the monument had cracked. What's going on? Nietion looked puzzled and couldn't help but look at In Fengwu. In Fengwu was also puzzled. He had seen countless swordsmen trigger the sword chime of the yellow spring, but he had never heard such a strange sword chime. It seemed that Lung Huang Jishue's sword intent was very different from others, which was why it triggered the monument of the yellow spring to make such a strange sword chime. Bang! At this moment, another crisp sword chime came out, and the monument of the yellow spring actually shook. In Fengwu was shocked by the scene in front of him. He couldn't help but gasp. He was stunned on the spot and was completely speechless. He never thought that Lung Huang Jishua's second earth chime would directly cause the monument of the Yellow Spring to shake. It should be known that the young human Emperor Lin Fan only caused the monument of the Yellow Spring to shake when he reached the earth chime. This undoubtedly showed that Lung Huang Jishua's sword intent was more terrifying than Lin Fan's. Don't underestimate the slight shaking of the monument of the Yellow Spring. Only swordsmen with the highest sword intent could trigger it. The monument of the Yellow Spring was engraved with sword patterns. These sword patterns had been constantly absorbing and sensing the sword intent since they were engraved on the monument. Their perception and identification of the sword intent were extremely accurate. Moreover, while absorbing the sword intent, these sword patterns were also constantly becoming stronger. Therefore, the current monument of the Yellow Spring was far more powerful than before. Lung Huang Jishua's earth chime had caused the monument of the Yellow Spring to shake. This was a height that no one had reached before. Even the Yang Godsword Emperor had only caused the monument of the Yellow Spring to shake when he reached the third earth chime. The Yang Godsword Emperor was a rare, innate sword embryo in the world, but Lung Huang Jishua didn't have a sword embryo, so why was she stronger than the Yang God? In Feng Wu couldn't understand why, but the way he looked at Cold Phoenix Ji Shui had changed. In addition to admiration, there was also a trace of fear. That's right, it was fear. A fear of the unknown. Cold Phoenix Ji Shui definitely had some kind of power that he couldn't see through. Now, he regretted even more. Why didn't he meet Cold Phoenix Ji Shui earlier? Otherwise, he wouldn't have chosen Nye Tian to fight against Lin Fan. If they could let Lung Huang Jishua fight against Lin Fan, their chances of victory would undoubtedly be greater. Nye Tian was also stunned. He could vaguely sense that some of the sword patterns on the Yellow Spring steel seemed to have changed. At the next moment, an even more shocking scene unfolded before everyone's eyes. Crack! A cracking sound rang out. The Yellow Spring's tablet shook once more. After that, a glaring crack appeared on the tablet. It flashed for a moment, then closed up in an instant. The strange scene stunned everyone on the spot, and they couldn't react for a long time. It cracked. After a long time, In Feng Wu finally reacted. His eyes widened, making his face look even rounder and more comical. He couldn't believe that Cold Phoenix Ji Shui's sword intent actually cracked the Yellow Spring steel. What did it mean for the Yellow Spring steel to crack? It meant that Cold Phoenix Ji Shui's sword intent aptitude was a level higher than Lin Fan's. Compared to the swordsman present, Lin Fan was already a unique existence. But Cold Phoenix Ji Shui was obviously stronger, and far stronger than Lin Fan. Lin Fan was like a crane in a flock of chickens, while Cold Phoenix Ji Shui was like a goshawk. Above the Yellow Spring steel, Human Emperor was also stunned. His eyes trembled, and he looked completely incredulous. It was unknown how many times the Yellow Spring Holy Land had been opened, and how many dazzling swordsmen had come out from this place. But none of these people had ever cracked the Yellow Spring steel. There was no doubt that Cold Phoenix Ji Shui was a special person who surpassed all swordsmen. In the next moment, Human Emperor's eyes suddenly became cold as he looked at Cold Phoenix Ji Shui, revealing a cold, killing intent. At this moment, the threat he felt from Cold Phoenix Ji Shui was even greater than the 10 annihilations of the evil woman. From this moment on, Cold Phoenix Ji Shui had become a person that the Human Emperor Palace must kill. After a long time, the crowd finally reacted and began to discuss. Just now, I think I saw the Yellow Spring steel crack. Is that true? I saw it too. The Yellow Spring steel really cracked. It was that swordswoman. How could the Yellow Spring steel be cracked by her sword intent? As the crowd discussed, they looked at Cold Phoenix Ji Shui from afar, unable to suppress the fear in their eyes. Although the crack in the Yellow Spring steel disappeared in a flash, everyone saw it clearly, like a brand that could not be erased. Cold Phoenix Ji Shui's face was cold and solemn, and she did not speak. Her figure moved and disappeared into the crowd. After a long time, the crowd calmed down, and the Yellow Spring sword chant test continued. Next, another 3 people triggered the cry of heaven. One was Nye Tian, one was Yu Jingchun, and the last one was a one-armed swordsman wearing a mask. Among the three, Nie Tian and the one-armed swordsman barely triggered the cry of heaven. But Yu Jingchun's cry of heaven was more powerful than the young human Emperor Lin Fan's, causing the crowd to exclaim. In Feng Wuo was neither disappointed nor happy with Nie Tian's performance. From the reaction of the yellow spring steel, Nie Tian's sword intent aptitude was indeed below Lin Fan's, but it still surpassed most people present. Half a day later, all the swordsmen present had completed the test. After the yellow spring sword chant, less than 1/10 of the original tens of thousands of swordsmen remained. Only around 2,000 people were qualified to participate in the next yellow spring battle. From the yellow spring sword chant, the person with the strongest sword intent was undoubtedly Cold Phoenix Ji Shui, followed by Yu Jingchun, Lin Fan, the one-armed swordsman, and Nie Tian. Only these 5 people triggered the cry of heaven. Dozens of others triggered the cry of earth, and the rest were swordsmen who triggered the cry of man. Next, the Yellow Spring battle 3 days later would begin among these 2,000 swordsmen. In the end, 200 people would be qualified to comprehend the Yellow Spring sword chant. The human emperor signaled for everyone to leave, but at this moment, a figure suddenly descended, causing everyone present to be stunned. The human emperor looked at the person who had arrived, and he couldn't help but frown. His expression was very ugly. Why is this guy here? Nie Tian was also stunned. He didn't expect Mori Shire to appear at this time. Why can't I participate in the Yellow Spring sword chant? Mori Shire smiled faintly. He didn't fear the human emperor at all. In the Yellow Spring Holy Land, he was the true king. He didn't even care about the human emperor. You want to participate in the Yellow Spring sword chant? The human emperor suppressed the anger in his heart and said in a cold tone, "Didn't you already succeed in comprehending the Yellow Spring sword chant?" A few days ago, everyone saw Mori Shire walk out of the Yellow Spring flower, which meant that he had succeeded in comprehending the Yellow Spring sword chant. Chapter 4299. Mori Shire stood in the air with an evil smile on his face. What is this guy trying to do? Nie Tian stared at Mori Shire as he had a bad feeling about this. He could feel that there was an evil force surging inside Mori Shire's body. Ren Huang frowned and stared at Mori Shire. This was the second time Mori Shire had embarrassed him, but he endured it and didn't plan on making a move. Mori Shire glanced around and finally made a move. His silhouette moved slightly and a ray of sword light flashed. Like a shooting star, it shot towards the monument of hell. In the next instant, a strange scene occurred. Bang! The ray of sword light landed, but it didn't penetrate the monument. Instead, a muffled sound was heard, and the monument shook violently. When the emperor saw this, his face changed color. He was shocked. The monument of hell was carved with countless sword inscriptions, and it could absorb any kind of sword intent. Why didn't Mori Shire absorb the sword intent? Instead, it was shaken. Everyone looked at the shaking monument of the Yellow Spring, and their expressions changed, revealing a look of panic. What's going on? This guy's sword intent didn't get absorbed by the monument of hell. The monument of hell isn't shaking. Is it going to break? This person's sword intent is strange. Who is he? Everyone discussed, and the fear in their eyes intensified. Everyone had a feeling that something bad was about to happen. Doomsday 12 had a smile on his face, enjoying everyone's panicked expressions. Crack! Just then, a cracking sound was heard, and everyone's eyes widened in shock. On the monument of hell, a glaring crack appeared and expanded rapidly. In an instant, it covered half of the monument. Whoosh! Then, the monument of hell lost control. Like a broken dam, rays of sword inscriptions gushed out and transformed into a violent sword intent that attacked the surrounding space. Everyone felt the impact of the sword while coming from the void. One by one, their faces changed, and they were extremely shocked. Who would have thought that Mori Shire's sword would directly shatter the Yellow Spring steel? Moreover, this crack was clearly different from the one caused by the Cold Phoenix's Snow Empress. There was no sign of it closing, and instead, it was getting bigger and bigger. Then, an even more shocking scene happened. Crack, crack, crack. The cracks on the yellow spring's steel rapidly expanded. Then they actually split open like a spider web, instantly spreading across the entire steel. The huge yellow spring steel was on the verge of collapsing. Bastard! At this moment, a furious roar rang out. After that, a silhouette appeared as heavy as a mountain, causing the entire space to tremble. Renwang. The crowd was shocked. They looked up into the sky and saw that the person was actually Renwang. Previously, Mori Shire had made things difficult for the human emperor several times, but the latter had tolerated it. At this moment, Mori Shire had directly destroyed the monument of the Yellow Springs. This was something that the human emperor could not tolerate. Boom! In the next moment, the human emperor directly attacked. He did not use his sword, but only triggered a sword will. Suddenly, the void shook, the wind and clouds surged, and the world seemed to be overturned. What a strong sword will! Nietian felt the terrifying sword will. His eyes couldn't help but tremble, and he was extremely shocked. This was the first time that he had seen Renwang attack. He did not expect that the majesty of the sword will had reached such a level. Although Renwang did not use his sword, judging from the sword will, his strength must be above that of Infeng Wua. Could Mori Shire block such a terrifying sword will? Mori Shire stood coldly in the sky, as if he had already expected that Renwang would attack. He did not panic, but the corner of his mouth pulled up into a smile, and then he waved his hand. Suddenly, the yellow spring steel sensed it, and the sword patterns condensed, turning into a sword-patterned sword. Then it pressed forward. Bang! In the next moment, the two extreme forces collided, and the world shook. Then, the most shocking scene appeared. Renwang's body suddenly trembled, and he retreated like a broken leaf in the wind. Nietian's eyes narrowed, and he could not believe what he was seeing. The person who attacked was Renwang, but he was blocked by Mori Shire, and he was even pushed back. Mori Shire, what kind of power did he use? Everyone's expression trembled, and they were also stunned by the scene in front of them. Many people froze on the spot, and they were completely petrified. Then, Renwang stabilized his body. Although he tried his best to hide it, there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. His deep eyes revealed a rare look of panic. Never in his wildest dreams did he imagine that he would be beaten back by youth. At that moment, he felt a force that weighed down on him. If it wasn't for his extraordinary strength, he would have been a corpse by now. The son of Yellow Spring. Infeng Wua looked at Mori Shire from afar, and the sound of shock echoed in his mind. At that moment, the power was so great that even he was shocked. If the person who attacked just now was him, he would have been more seriously injured than Renwang. Mori Shire could directly mobilize the power of the sword inscriptions in the monument of Yellow Spring. It was terrifying. Renwang, I have said that in the holy land of Yellow Spring, I'm the absolute ruler. Mori Shire looked at Renwang playfully and said, that was just a warning. If you dare to attack again, I will definitely kill you. You puffed. Renwang's eyes trembled, and under the attack of his chi and blood, he spat out a mouthful of blood. All the past Renwang were supreme existences, and there had never been a Renwang who was as aggrieved as him. Mori Shire smiled coldly and no longer cared about Renwang. His eyes were cold, and he stared straight at the monument of Yellow Spring, as if he was looking for something. Nietian frowned, and he didn't know what Mori Shire was looking for. Nietian, it's time for you to return the favor you owe me, Mori Shire suddenly said to Nietian after a while. Nietian's eyes narrowed, and his heart couldn't help but tighten. Back then, Mori Shire did help him a few times, and when the Heaven Saintess was in danger, it was Mori Shire who saved her. Because of that, Nietian owed Mori Shire a favor. At that time, Mori Shire told Nietian that he would accompany him to a place after the Hidden Dragon contest. But some things happened later, and Mori Shire didn't look for Nietian. Could it be that this guy wanted to bring me here? Nietian suddenly realized, and he was shocked. At this moment, Mori Shire formed a strange seal with both of his hands, and surges of sword intent gushed out, forming a sword intent whirlpool on the monument of Yellow Spring. Please, Mori Shire looked at Nietion and made a gesture. Nietion's expression changed again. Mori Shire opened up a tunnel on the monument of Yellow Spring, and he actually wanted him to enter it. Chapter 4300. Where are they? High up in the sky, everyone was shocked. After a long while, someone shouted. Everything that happened before them was too strange. Mori Shire first smashed the underworld monument to the brink of shattering. Then, he actually formed a vortex of sword intent on the monument and entered the monument with Nietion. Why did he break the underworld monument? Why did he enter the monument? Was there something he wanted in the monument? Also, why did he ask Nietion to enter the underworld monument with him? A series of questions puzzled everyone. Their expressions became more and more serious. Infenghua looked at the underworld monument with a terrible expression. He was not worried about Nietion's safety. Instead, he was worried that Mori Shire would do something unexpected. Nietion had told him about Mori Shire before. Although it was simple, he could tell that Mori Shire seemed to be trying to get close to Nietion. As the son of the underworld, Mori Shire himself was an extremely dangerous existence. He spent so much effort to get close to Nietion. There must be a secret that he could not let others know. Infenghua was worried that Nietion would be used by Mori Shire. At the same time, in the underworld monument, Nietion and Mori Shire stood in a vast space. There were huge sword shadows around them. They were like giants of the world, giving people a strong sense of oppression. Mori Shire, what is this place? Nietion frowned and asked in a low voice. He felt that the world in front of him was very big. However, there was nothing around except for these sword shadows. This is the inner space of the underworld monument. The corners of Doomsday, 12's mouth raised into a smile, and he said, "You should be able to feel that the sword intent aura here is much stronger than outside." Yes, Nietion nodded. The sword intent here was indeed very strong, very suitable for swordsmen to cultivate. However, he knew that Mori Shire had not brought him here to cultivate, so he said directly, "Mori Shire, tell me your purpose. Help me find something, and I'll write off all the favors you owe me," Mori Shire said with a faint smile. "What are you looking for?" Nietion frowned and couldn't help feeling a little puzzled. Mori Shire should be more familiar with this place than him. What exactly was he looking for? He had to be the one to do it. "Nietion, do you know what the Yellow Springs Holy Land is?" Mori Shire narrowed his eyes and suddenly asked. Nietion looked at Mori Shire without saying anything, waiting for him to continue. The Yellow Springs Holy Land was originally called the Three Souls Tomb. The corner of Doomsday, 12's mouth twitched, and his expression changed as well. He said, "A long time ago, the Three Souls Tomb was a very prosperous place, a paradise on earth. The Yellow Springs race lived in the Three Souls Tomb for generations. They inherited the Yellow Springs bloodline and were called the Yellow Springs Sword Race. However, a calamity came and the Yellow Springs race was massacred. The murderer transformed the Three Souls Tomb into a giant seal, trapping all the souls of the Yellow Springs clan in the Three Souls Tomb. The Yellow Springs Sword Race was a natural sword race. Their bloodline power was comparable to the innate sword embryo. Therefore, even after the souls of the members of the Sword Clan have been sealed, they still possess extremely powerful sword comprehension. Therefore, these sealed souls were used as the best place to comprehend the sword. Speaking of this, Mori Shire's eyes slightly trembled and a cold, murderous intent surged. A place to comprehend the sword? Nietion heard this and his heart tightened. He immediately thought of something and blurted out, "The Yellow Springs flower." Wasn't the Yellow Springs flower the best place to comprehend the sword? Could it be that each Yellow Springs flower was formed from the souls of the dead Yellow Springs Sword Race members? At the thought of this, Nietion's expression changed. One could well imagine the horror in his heart. "It's the Yellow Springs flower." Mori Shire suddenly looked at Nietion and said seriously, "The Yellow Springs flower in your eyes and the Yellow Springs sword comprehension you want, the truth behind it is the souls of the Yellow Springs Sword Race members. Each Yellow Springs flower represents a seal of the Yellow Springs flower. each sealed soul of the Yellow Springs sword race. This. Nietian took a deep breath and couldn't speak for a long time. How could he have known that there was such a bloody truth behind the Yellow Springs flower? After a while, Nietian became cold and asked, Mori Shire, you said you were from the Yellow Springs sword race. Didn't you also comprehend the sword in the Yellow Springs sword race? Is that so? Mori Shire sneered and said, You only saw me walk out of the Yellow Springs flower. Are you sure I comprehended the sword in the Yellow Springs flower? Not the Yellow Springs sword comprehension? Then you. Nietian's expression darkened as he suddenly thought of something and said with a trembling voice, You were originally in the Yellow Springs flower? If Mori Shire wasn't comprehending the sword in the Yellow Springs flower, then there was only one possibility. He was originally in the Yellow Springs flower. Or rather, he was the Yellow Springs flower. Mori Shire, like the souls of the Yellow Springs sword race members, were also sealed in the Yellow Springs flower. Nietian, you're not stupid after all. Mori Shire looked at the shocked Nietian and couldn't help but laugh. I was indeed sealed in the Yellow Springs flower. Originally, my soul should have been slowly devoured by the Yellow Springs flower. However, the heavens did not give up on my Yellow Springs flower. The Yellow Springs sword race. When my soul was about to perish, the second soul that had been hiding in my soul for a long time awakened. The three souls of the Yellow Springs. Nietian's pupils immediately shrank as he exclaimed. Infengwa once told him that the children of the Yellow Springs were different from ordinary people. They had the three souls of the Yellow Springs. One body, three souls. No wonder why Mori Shire was not devoured by the Yellow Springs flower and instead came back to life. Since you already know, I won't hide it from you anymore. Mori Shire wasn't surprised that Nietian knew about the three souls of the Yellow Springs. Instead, he smiled faintly and said, The Mori Shire you saw back then was only my first soul. The Mori Shire you saw was me in my dual soul state. Nietian looked at Mori Shire with a shocked expression. Infengwa guessed correctly. The current Mori Shire was indeed in his dual soul state. Mori Shire, you told me all this and brought me here. What do you want me to find? Nietian forced himself to calm down and asked in a low voice. You know that I have the three souls of the Yellow Springs, but now I am in my dual soul state. What do you think I want you to find? Mori Shire's lips curled into a smile as he asked in return. You want me to help you find your third soul? Nietian's pupils shrank as he immediately reacted and exclaimed. Mori Shire smiled faintly and nodded. This. Nietian was stunned and couldn't speak for a long time. He never thought that Mori Shire would want him to help find his third soul. Chapter 43:01. In the Yellow Springs steel, Nietian stared at Doomsday 12 with a confused expression. Why would Mori Shire say that he was the only one who could find the third soul? The Primal Star Stone. Mori Shire obviously knew what Nietian was thinking. He smiled faintly and said, The Primal Star Stone in your body has a special connection to my third soul. Nietian furrowed his brows and became even more confused. Was there a connection between the Primal Star Stone and Mori Shire's third soul? I don't know why either. Mori Shire shook his head and smiled. But you owe me a favor. You must find my third soul. Your third soul is here. Nietian looked at the sword shadows around him and became even more confused. Mori Shire nodded and said, This is the space inside the Monument of Yellow Springs. The Monument of Yellow Springs is a sealing artifact. These sword shadows are formed from the sword runes of countless ancient swordsmen. When you were testing before, all the sword intent absorbed by the Monument of Yellow Springs was absorbed by the sword shadows. After the absorbed sword intent enters the stone tablet, it will be absorbed by these sword shadows to maintain the power of the sword shadows. So that's how it is. Nietian finally understood. No wonder the powerful swordsmen could not damage the Monument of Yellow Springs no matter how they attacked it from the outside. It was because of the existence of these sword shadows. Every swordsman faced these sword shadows when they attacked the Monument of Yellow Springs. Unless one's power surpassed the sum of these sword shadows, it was impossible to damage the Monument of Yellow Springs. These sword shadows were formed from the sword runes of powerful ancient swordsmen. In the present world, no one could resist such a huge sword formation at the same time. But the strange thing was that Morishire had almost shattered the monument of Yellow Springs with one strike. What was going on? My sword intent is different from yours. The monument of Yellow Springs cannot absorb it. Morishire smiled faintly and looked at Nyetion. Nyetion's eyes darkened. Is your third soul trapped in these sword shadows? Yes. Morishire nodded and said, to be exact, it's sealed in one of the sword shadows. Your mission is to find that sword shadow. Nyetion's face darkened when he heard this. It was hard to tell how big this space was. The sword images filled the entire space, and no one knew how many there were. If he were to search for the sword shadows one by one, it was unknown how long it would take him to find the sword shadow that sealed the third soul. There are over 9 million sword shadows here. If you were to sense them one by one, it would probably take you decades. Morishire looked at Nyetion and said with a faint smile, but I believe that you will find a faster way. Nyetion's expression turned ugly. He wished he could kill Morishire right away. The Yellow Springs contest would begin in 3 days. Human Emperor and the others would not wait for Nyetion. Therefore, within 3 days, Nyetion must leave this place. The Yellow Springs contest was too important to him. It was related to Rui Qianyu's life and death. With a faint smile, Doomsday 12 looked at Nyetion with an appreciative expression. You may begin now. Nyetion suppressed the anger in his heart. He took a deep breath and calmed himself down. At this point, there was no point in being angry. He could only calm down and find a way to quickly find the third soul. After calming down, Nyetion began to carefully sense the sword shadows around him. He spread out his divine sense and opened his demonic eye. At the same time, he connected his soul with the fox demon of eternal night to maximize his senses. Because of this, he could sense hundreds of sword shadows at the same time. However, such a number was like a drop in the ocean compared to the nearly 10 million sword shadows. Half a day later, bean-sized beads of sweat appeared on Nyetion's forehead. His face was also slightly pale. Even he could not withstand the exhaustion of mental energy for a long period of time. However, he had only sensed 1,000 sword shadows. At this rate, even if he did not sleep or rest, it would take him more than 10 years. I can't go on like this. I have to find a better way. Nyetion took a deep breath, and his face recovered a little. The auras of these sword shadows were very similar. The sword carvings inside them were extremely complicated. It was too difficult for Nyetion to find a sealed soul among them. At that moment, the little fat cat's voice rang out, and it reminded Nyetion, since this guy said that Origin Starstones have a special connection to his third soul, why don't you give it a try with star power? That's right. Nyetion's eyes quivered. He was instantly excited. Why didn't he think of this earlier? After resting for a while, Nyetion felt that his energy had recovered a little. He immediately began to search for the third soul. This time, he used a different method. He released the heaven-shrouding totem and infused it with his sword essence to cover the sword shadows. Huh. Morishire saw this and frowned. He did not understand what Nyetion was doing. Nyetion closed his eyes and drew a large image in his mind. It was the holographic projection of the sword array before him. Under the heaven-shrouding totem, the sword shadows shone with a strange light. They were like stars in the sky. This guy has some tricks up his sleeve. Morishire suddenly realized something. His pupils contracted and he was shocked. Nyetion's lips curled up. The holographic projection in his mind slowly expanded and shrouded more sword shadows. At this point, he only needed to find the sword shadows that shone with a different light to confirm the location of the third soul. Soon, half a day passed. The holographic projection in Nyetion's mind had covered half of the sword array. With the help of the heaven-shrouding totem, he did not need to sense the sword shadows one by one. At this rate, even if he was unlucky, he would only need 2 to 3 days to find the sword shadow that sealed the third soul. Morishire looked at Nyetion. Although he appeared calm, he was actually more excited than Nyetion. As long as he found his third soul and restored it to its original state, there would be hope for him to avenge the Underworld Swordsman clan. He carried the destiny of the son of Underworld. For the sake of the Swordsman clan, he must find a mastermind. Found it. Right at this moment, Nyetian suddenly let out a cry of pleasant surprise. His tightly closed eyes suddenly opened, and then his figure directly flashed towards one of the sword shadows. Seeing this, Mori Shire's eyes sparkled, and he immediately followed. Like a gust of wind, Nyetian landed in front of one of the sword shadows. Staring at it with blazing eyes, he said with a plain tone, "You're the one." The 12 Apocalypse's figures landed, their eyes trembling with excitement and fervor. He had finally found the third soul that he had been dreaming of. Chapter 43:02. In the Yellow Spring tablet, the sword shadow collapsed, and a huge wave of soul power was released, causing the whole world to shake as if it was about to collapse. Nyetian's heart trembled. Such a powerful soul power aura. Is this the third soul of the 12th Doomsday Beast? He had never seen such a huge soul power, and this was only Mori Shire's third soul. It was hard to imagine how terrifying Mori Shire's soul power would be when he was in the state of 3 souls. At this moment, Nyetian suddenly felt a terrifying power surging in his body, causing his expression to change. Star Trace Dark Seal. In the next moment, he suddenly realized that the Star Trace Dark Seal was about to be unsealed. The power of the stars had a total of 9 Star Trace Dark Seals, and Nyetian had only unsealed 3 of them, so he was unable to unleash the true power of the stars. Originally, he wanted to fuse with the universe singularity to unseal the 4th Star Trace Dark Seal, but his martial body was not strong enough, so he did not take the risk. However, at this moment, he could clearly feel that the 4th Star Trace Dark Seal was loosening, as if it was about to be unsealed. Mori Shire stretched out his palm, and suddenly an infinite amount of soul power gathered, forming a soul power vortex in his palm. At this moment, he suddenly realized that Nyetian's expression was strange, and he could not help but feel puzzled. He immediately realized that it was his third soul that was reacting to some kind of power in Nyetian's body, which was why the latter was acting strangely. It seems that there is indeed an unusual connection between the third soul and the raw star stone. Mori Shire frowned, and as he spoke, he activated the power of the third soul, trying to get closer to Nyetian. Nyetian was surrounded by waves of soul power, and suddenly the 4th Star Trace Dark Seal in his body became more active, as if it was about to be unsealed. How can this be? The 4th Star Trace Dark Seal in Nyetian's body went berserk, and a violent power rushed into his limbs and veins, making him almost unable to stand steadily. But what really shocked him was why Mori Shire's third soul could make the 4th Star Trace Dark Seal so violent. This berserk, could it be that the third soul could unlock the 4th Star Mark Dark Seal? It really is the power of the third soul. Mori Shire was certain that it was the third soul that was causing Nyetian's power to change, and he immediately became excited. His eyes shone with a scorching light, because he could feel that his third soul was also becoming stronger. The connection between the third soul and the 4th Star Mark of Yellow Springs was very subtle. They actually had the effect of promoting each other. Nyetian felt the power in his body becoming more and more violent, and he was about to lose control of it. From the 4th Star Trace Dark Seal, a violent power continuously gushed out, like water bursting out of a dam, attacking Nyetian's bones and meridians. Nyetian could clearly hear the sound of his bones rubbing against each other. He sat cross-legged and concentrated on adjusting his breathing, trying his best to calm himself down. At this moment, Mori Shire's eyes were blazing with incomparable passion. The third soul in his palm was rapidly expanding, and the aura of his soul power spread out, turning into streaks of light that flowed in all directions, dazzling and resplendent. The stronger the third soul, the better it is for the 3 souls of Yellow Springs to fuse. His origin star stones are very effective in stimulating the third soul. This is a good opportunity. I can't miss it. Doomsday was incomparably excited as he enveloped Nyetian with the soul power of the third soul. Heaven, he wanted to borrow the power of the origin star stone to strengthen the third soul. Boom! At the same time, a tremendous force suddenly erupted from Yetion's body. Instantly, a terrifying force was released, and a horrifying wave of air was created in the air, as if it was going to destroy everything. Maury Shire's body trembled slightly. He couldn't help but take a few steps back, and a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. This force so strong. He steadied himself, and his eyes revealed a sinister look, cold, and stared at Nyetion with fear and anger. Boom! But at this moment, Nyetion's body shook again, and then an even more violent force gushed out of him, like a raging beast. Bang! Maury Shire's eyes trembled violently, and before he could react, he was hit by the raging waves and was forced back again. Before he could stabilize himself, he spat out a mouthful of blood. How is this possible? He forcefully steadied himself. His eyes were filled with shock, and his face was pale. In a monument of yellow springs, he could borrow the power of the sword shadows and was almost invincible. However, the power released by Nyetion had actually injured him. This was simply unbelievable. Just what kind of power did Nyetion unseal in his body? How could it be so terrifying? At this moment, Maury Shire's eyes were red, and his murderous intent was bone-chilling. He felt a strong sense of threat from Nyetion. He would not allow anyone outside of his control to exist, especially in the Yellow Springs Holy Land. However, he was also very confused. Just what was that strange origin star stone, and why did it have such a strong connection with his third soul? Was the origin star stone somehow related to the Yellow Springs swordsman tribe? He had a feeling that the origin star stone was related to the survival of the entire Yellow Springs swordsman tribe. He vaguely remembered that the Yellow Springs swordsman tribe had a legend about the Yellow Springs star. Legend had it that after the Yellow Springs swordsman tribe's calamity, the Yellow Springs star would appear and save the tribe. Could the origin star stone in his body be the legendary Yellow Springs star? Maury Shire was confused. Although he wanted to kill Nyetion, he resisted the urge. He could feel that the origin star stone contained a strong aura of life. Perhaps this life energy could free the souls of the Sword Tribe members sealed in the Yellow Springs flower. After the souls of the Sword Tribe members were sealed in the Yellow Springs flower, they were devoured by the Yellow Springs flower. But Maury Shire knew that the souls of the Sword Tribe members did not disappear completely. They were hidden deep within the Yellow Springs flower. If the origin star stone really was the legendary Yellow Springs star of the Sword Tribe, then it was very likely that it contained the power to free the souls of the Sword Tribe members. This was the Yellow Springs swordsman tribe's last hope. If he killed Nyetion, then this last hope would no longer exist. He could not risk the survival of the Yellow Springs swordsman tribe. Before he figured out the secret of the origin star stone, Nyetion must not die. Boom! Just as Maury Shire was in a state of shock, Nyetion's body changed again. A faint layer of starlight appeared around his body. It was only a thin layer, but it gave the illusion that it was indestructible. Maury Shire did not know what was happening to Nyetion's body. He could not help but feel nervous and did not dare to approach him. Chapter 43:03. At the Yellow Spring Sacred Ground, the tablet of Yellow Spring was severely damaged. It was like a small boat in a storm about to shatter at any time. There were not many swordsmen around the tablet of Yellow Spring. Most of them had gone to prepare for the Yellow Spring contest. There was only half a day left before the Yellow Spring contest would begin. Due to the sudden situation at the tablet of Yellow Spring, the contest was held in another spacious area. Senior, there's no news from Nyetion and that guy since they entered the tablet of Yellow Spring. Will they be all right? The Crimson Life Loyal Heart looked at the tablet of Yellow Spring worriedly and asked Infongwua. They'll be fine, Infongwua replied. Although he said it firmly, his eyes were filled with doubt. He was more worried than the Crimson Life Loyal Heart. The Yellow Spring contest was about to begin. If Nyetion couldn't appear in time, it would mean that he had given up. This was equivalent to admitting defeat. Then Infongwua would lose the bet with the human sovereign. This bet was not only related to the Empress of the Ghost Clan, but also the life and death of the entire Ghost Clan. A barely detectable tremor appeared in Yin Feng's eyes as he prayed inwardly. Nietian, Nietian, you can't let anything happen to you. He had never begged anyone in his life. But at this moment, all the hopes of him and the Ghost Clan rested on Nietian. He couldn't help but feel nervous. At this moment, a figure suddenly jumped out from the tablet of Yellow Spring. He seemed to be panicking. It's him. Yin Fengwu's eyes narrowed. When he saw that the figure was Mori Shire, his expression changed, and he was shocked. There was a trace of blood at the corner of Apocalypse 12's mouth. His face was extremely pale, as if he had been heavily injured. Moreover, he was panicking as if he had just narrowly escaped death, causing others to be puzzled. This could it be? Yin Fengwu's eyes trembled, and his heart skipped a beat. Mori Shire escaped in panic, but Nietian was nowhere to be seen. Didn't that mean that Nietian might have died in the tablet of Yellow Spring? Where's Nietian? The Red Life Loyal Heart also reacted at this time. With a roar, the sword chi around its body surged like the sea. It could not care too much. It directly stepped out, and the rolling sword chi was like a mountain pressing down on Mori Shire. Mori Shire suddenly turned around, and his eyes revealed a touch of fierceness. He directly stretched out his hand, and his palm transformed into a sword, forcibly blocking the sword pressure of the Crimson Life Loyal Essence. The Scarlet Life Dan Hart was shocked, and it couldn't help but take a few steps back. Its face was red and ugly. In a holy land of Hades, Mori Shire could activate the power of the sword will in the space. Even Arun Huang was forced to retreat by him, let alone the Red Life Loyal Essence. The Scarlet Life Dan Hart stabilized itself and wanted to attack again, but it was stopped by Yin Fengwu. What happened inside? Yin Fengwu looked gloomy and cold at Mori Shire. When Nietian comes out, you can ask him. Mori Shire was annoyed and responded indifferently. Yin Fengwu and the Scarlet Life Loyal Essence changed their expressions at the same time, and the tension in their hearts eased a lot. Looking at Mori Shire, Nietian seemed to be fine, and he looked very angry. Could it be that the person who hurt him was Nietian? At this time in the distance, there were also dozens of swordsmen watching, but no one dared to approach. They just observed from a distance. Who the hell is this guy? He came out of the tablet of Hades. How could he be injured? This guy once blocked Arun Huang. It's really terrible. I think he entered the tablet of Hades to find something very important to him. The swordsman named Nietian hasn't come out yet. Could he have died in the tablet? The crowd was talking, and looking at Mori Shire was very strange, with fear and disgust. Bang! At this time, the huge tablet of Hades suddenly exploded, and then the giant tablet collapsed. The tens of thousands of sword patterns were completely released and turned into rolling sword will, rushing in all directions. Yin Fengwu and the Scarlet Life Loyal Essence's expressions changed, and they immediately retreated. The sword will was powerful like a tsunami, and the sharpness in the sword will was even more terrible than the wind blades. If they were to be hit head-on, they would probably be injured. But Mori Shire didn't care at all, and he was not afraid of the sword will at all. He stood in the air like a rock, and no matter how the sword will hit him, he didn't move at all. Then the next moment, a figure appeared, like a sword out of its sheath, showing off its sharpness and sword chi. Nietian. Yin Fengwu and the Crimson Life Core Essence steadied themselves, and when they saw that the figure was none other than Nietian, they both exclaimed in shock. Nietian really didn't die, and he broke out of the tablet of Hades. In the sky, Nietian was like a pine tree, straight and sharp like a sword. There was a smile at the corner of his mouth, but there was a great surprise in his heart that he couldn't suppress. Just now, when the star-marked dark seal in his body resonated with the third soul of Hades, his star-marked dark seal was really unsealed. Moreover, it wasn't just one seal that was unsealed, but three. That's right, it was the 3 star-marked dark seals that were unsealed one by one. So the power released from his body directly injured Mori Shire. At this moment, of the 9 star-marked dark seals in Nietian's star power, 6 had been unsealed. His martial body, bloodline, sword will, and aura were already very different from before, It was simply a qualitative leap. Under the huge impact of the unsealing of the 3-star mark Dark Seals, his strength had also increased. His martial Tao had reached the 4th heaven tribulation, and his sword Tao had reached the 4th heaven tribulation. The unsealing of the star mark Dark Seals made his martial body more natural, purer, and more harmonious. It was a great thing for him to keep his martial Tao and sword Tao realm in line. Martial Tao and sword Tao were interlinked and complemented each other. This was the best state for a martial artist. Nie Tian, your aura. In Feng Wua came to Nie Tian's side, his fat face extremely surprised. How is this possible? The Scarlet Life Loyal Heart was even more shocked. He had already faintly felt that the star-marked Dark Seals in Nie Tian's body had been unsealed again. The Yellow Springs battle hasn't started yet, right? Nie Tian smiled faintly and asked directly. No. In Feng Wua nodded repeatedly. His face was filled with unconcealable joy. He didn't expect that Nie Tian entering the Yellow Springs monument would be a blessing in disguise, and his strength would have such a huge improvement. Nie Tian. At this moment, Mori Shire spoke coldly, his pair of eyes filled with a cold intent, staring resentfully at Nie Tian. Mori Shire, I helped you find what you were looking for, and also helped you make it stronger. What else are you dissatisfied with? Nie Tian smiled faintly and said calmly. Mori Shire was stunned. He didn't know what to say. Nie Tian was right. He found the 3rd soul, and it had become stronger. The former had fulfilled all his requirements. Chapter 43:04. Nie Tian felt Mori Shire's murderous intent and frowned. He didn't expect that Mori Shire would also participate in the Yellow Spring contest. In the Yellow Springs sacred land, even the human sovereign was easily defeated by Mori Shire. If he participated in the Yellow Spring contest, wouldn't he be invincible? I look forward to a battle with you, said Doomsday 12 with a sinister smile. Without any hesitation, he transformed into a streak of sword light and disappeared. This guy's injuries have recovered. In Feng Wua looked at the place where Mori Shire disappeared and was surprised. Mori Shire was severely injured just now, but after the impact of the sword intent, not only did he not get injured again, but he even recovered from his previous injuries. It was really strange. The Crimson Life Loyal Heart couldn't help but ask excitedly, Nie Tian, what on earth happened in the steel these days? How did your strength improve so fast? It couldn't help but wonder. With these words, Nie Tian took a deep breath and briefly explained what had happened in the Yellow Spring steel. So he entered the Yellow Spring monument to find the 3rd soul. In Feng Wu's fat face was shocked and ugly. It seemed that something bad was going to happen. Big brother, if he gathers all 3 souls, will it be very scary? Nie Tian frowned and asked carefully. If Mori Shire gathers all 3 souls, his strength will be restored to its peak or even reach the state of destroying the world. That would be troublesome. Mori Shire carried the blood feud of the extermination of his clan. The long-term imprisonment and oppression had planted the seed of destruction in his heart. If Mori Shire really started his journey to destroy the world, then Nie Tian would undoubtedly be the one to pave the way for him. I don't know much about the son of Yellow Spring. After the Yellow Spring contest is over, I will bring you to see someone. You should know about the son of Yellow Spring. In Feng Wua frowned and sighed. Okay. Nie Tian nodded. There was no point in worrying about this now. The most important thing now was to focus on the Yellow Spring struggle. Nie Tian, your strength has improved a lot. How confident are you when you fight against the young human sovereign again? In Feng Wua asked with some excitement. Nie Tian's lips curled up slightly. He thought for a moment and said, when Lin Fan fought with me before, I didn't know how much power he used. If that is his true strength, I am very confident that I can defeat him. 10 out of 10. In Feng Wu's eyes narrowed as he became excited. Yes. Nie Tian nodded with a smile and said, even if he hid his strength at that time, I'm quite confident that I can defeat him. Nie Tian, it's good that you're confident. However, since Lin Fan was chosen by Mu Jioga to be the next human emperor, he definitely had some tricks up his sleeves. When you fight against him, You must be careful. Don't underestimate him. Yin Fengwo reminded Nye Tian with a faint smile. Big brother, don't worry. I'm not that stupid. Nye Tian also smiled confidently. When a cultivator fought, their mentality was extremely important. They were confident but not arrogant. They were fearless but did not underestimate their opponent. This was the best state. That's good. Yin Fengwo laughed. He felt much better now. In the next half of the day, Nye Tian and Yu Jingqian trained each other to familiarize themselves with their current physical state. Previously, his strength was almost the same as Yu Jingqian's. But now, even if he could suppress his sword will, Yu Jingqian was still unable to cope. Soon, half a day had passed. The Yellow Springs struggle officially began. In the sky above a valley, 200 sword pillars had been erected. They were thousands of meters tall. This was the place where the swordsmen practiced martial arts. More than 2,000 swordsmen stood high in the sky. They were like hunting beasts, eager to fight. At this time, the figure of the human sovereign appeared. He stood directly on the highest sword pillar and looked down at the crowd with a majestic aura. The crowd immediately quieted down. No one dared to make a sound. They had already experienced the human sovereign's methods. They knew that he was not just an ordinary cruel person. Everyone, the Yellow Spring struggle is about to begin. For the sake of fairness, I will divide the competition into 2 stages. The human sovereign spoke loudly. His powerful voice fell in everyone's ears. The first stage is the fight for the sword pillars. The fight for the sword pillars. The crowd's expression changed. They could not help but look at the sword pillars in front of them. The human sovereign smiled lightly and continued. There are 200 sword pillars here. When the Yellow Spring struggle begins, everyone can fight for them freely. The person who stands on top of the sword pillar will be the winner. He will then be qualified to participate in the Yellow Springs sword comprehension competition. As soon as he finished speaking, the crowd could not help but whisper among themselves. Using these sword pillars to determine the right to participate in the Yellow Springs sword comprehension competition. Wouldn't the competition be very intense? I'm afraid that many people will die in order to fight for the sword pillars. There are more than 2,000 people here. There are only 200 sword pillars. There is less than a 1 in 10 chance. The crowd's expression changed. Some looked ugly, while others were happy. On the other hand, Nye Tian's expression darkened as he frowned. Although the human sovereign's method could determine the 200 people who would comprehend the Yellow Springs sword comprehension competition very quickly, the final outcome would undoubtedly be extremely tragic. Just think about it. Who would be willing to give up the chance to comprehend the Yellow Springs sword comprehension competition at this point? Once the fight for the sword pillars began, the crowd would not fight with their lives on the line. They would fight with everything they had without holding anything back. These 2,000 people were either powerful swordsmen who had made a name for themselves a long time ago, or young, talented swordsmen. They could be said to be the most outstanding swordsmen in the All Saints world. In just a few hours, more than half of the 2,000 people would definitely be killed or injured. The human sovereign was clearly eliminating potential enemies that posed a threat to the human sovereign hall. It had to be said that the human sovereign's methods were truly sinister and vicious. Your Majesty, since the first stage has already determined the 200 people who will comprehend the Yellow Springs sword comprehension competition, what's the second stage? Someone suddenly called out at this moment. The human sovereign smiled faintly and said loudly, "The Yellow Springs flowers differ in strength and aura. Naturally, the people who comprehend the Yellow Springs sword comprehension competition will have to decide who is stronger and who is weaker. Those who rank at the top have the right to choose the Yellow Springs flower first." I see. The crowd reacted and nodded. Everyone, let me remind you again that everyone must abide by the previous rules. If anyone dares to violate the rules, I will not only kill you, but also the sect and clan behind you. I will eliminate them all. The human sovereign's gaze swept across the crowd, and a dark expression appeared on his face. The crowd shuddered and kept quiet out of fear. The human sovereign's threat was not just a verbal threat. Since he had said it, he would definitely do it. I hereby announce that the Yellow Springs Sword Comprehension Competition has begun. Then, the corner of the human sovereign's lips curled into a smile as he announced calmly. However, after he finished speaking, he did not move and remained standing on the sword pillar. Chapter 43:05. Nietian looked at the human emperor with a strange look in his eyes. Is this guy also going to participate in the Yellow Springs struggle? Yin Fenghua noticed that Ren Huang didn't move and frowned. At this moment, a few swordsmen tried to get close to the sword pillar where Ren Huang was, waiting for him to leave. Piss off. However, Ren Huang let out a cold roar. Instantly, a strong sword force was released, and the few people were sent flying. Nietian's expression changed when he saw this. It seemed that Ren Huang was indeed going to participate in the Yellow Spring struggle. Ren Huang didn't break the rules. He suppressed his cultivation to the 9th layer of Heaven Tribulation Sage, King, and the 9th layer of Sword Tribulation. Even so, the other swordsman couldn't bear the sudden burst of aura. He was too powerful. Almost no one in the same realm was his match. He wants to comprehend the sword for the second time. Yin Fenghua looked at Ren Huang with an ugly expression. He didn't expect Ren Huang to comprehend the sword for the second time. If the human emperor really succeeded, then when he walked out of the flower of the netherworld, his strength would definitely be greatly improved. Yin Fenghua was weaker than Ren Huang. If Ren Huang succeeded, then Ren Huang wouldn't be able to fight back. Big brother, you don't need to take the risk. As long as I can defeat Lin Fan, I can protect the Empress. Nietian knew what Yin Fenghua was thinking. Yin Fenghua shook his head. Ren Huang won't go back on his words. But he only promised not to kill the Empress. He didn't promise not to kill us. Do you think we can walk out of the Yellow Spring sacred ground if Ren Huang succeeds? Nietian's eyebrows furrowed, and he was at a loss for words. Ren Huang was too cunning. He was forcing Yin Fenghua to participate in the Yellow Spring struggle. Compared to Yin Fenghua, Ren Huang was younger and more talented. Therefore, the risk of comprehending the sword for the second time was lower. On the other hand, although Yin Fenghua was powerful, he was old and his talent was weaker than Ren Huang. The risk of comprehending the sword for the second time was high. But if he did not go through the second Netherworld sword comprehension, once he succeeded in becoming a Ren Huang, it would be a fatal doomsday. Nietian, you don't have to worry about me. As long as you can defeat Lin Fan, I won't be defeated by the human emperor. Yin Fenghua suddenly smiled and looked at Nietian confidently. Nietian nodded heavily, feeling much more at ease. At this moment, the fight for the sword pillars was getting more and more intense. In order to snatch the sword pillars, all the swordsmen spared no effort, and their attacks were extremely fierce. Die! A swordsman bellowed in rage. His sword slashed down, and the sword shadow was like lightning, directly piercing through another swordsman below. You can die too. At this moment, a gloomy voice sounded out from the other side, and a dark sword light attacked. The swordsman who attacked just now didn't even have the time to react before he died on the spot. Seeing this, Nietian's face couldn't help but turn gloomy. If the fight continued like this, it would be good if more than half of the 2,000 swordsmen survived. Let's do it. Yin Fenghua frowned, and then he didn't wait any longer. His figure moved, and he directly rushed over. His sword essence was extremely fierce, and his killing intent was extremely strong. Everywhere he passed, the surrounding swordsmen all avoided him, not daring to face his sharpness. In the blink of an eye, Yin Fenghua stood firmly on a sword pillar, and no one dared to challenge him. At this moment, Nietian's figure also moved. The sword essence around him surged, and he targeted a sword pillar and directly rushed over. Idiot, you want to snatch a sword pillar? Dream on. A swordsman saw this and sneered. He directly slashed down with his sword, and the sword light descended, bombarding Nietian. It was obvious that this swordsman didn't take Nietian seriously. After all, the latter hadn't even reached the 9 levels of Heaven's Wrath. But in the next moment, his eyes widened. Bang! The sword essence around Nietian exploded with a bang, and it was like a surging wave, directly smashing the sword shadow into pieces. Then, those swordsmen didn't even have time to react before they were directly blasted out. This fellow's sword essence is so terrifying. The surrounding swordsmen were stunned at first, and then they reacted, and the eyes that looked at Nyetian carried unconcealable horror. Who would have thought that such a seemingly young swordsman would explode with such a shocking sword essence? Get lost. But there were still some people who didn't quite believe it. A burly middle-aged swordsman roared, and the sword essence around him surged like a landslide. He slashed down with his sword, and it pressed down madly towards Nyetian. Nyetian's eyes slightly sank, and he directly slapped out with the sword essence in his palm. Not only did it shatter the sword shadow that pounced towards him, but it also blasted that person hundreds of meters away. You? Puff. That person barely stabilized his figure and was just about to speak, but a mouthful of blood sprayed out, and his face was ghastly pale. Nyetian completely ignored him. The sword essence around him surged, and he charged towards the sword pillar. You want to snatch my sword pillar? It won't be that easy. A swordsman in green on the sword pillar stared at Nyetian coldly. With a low shout, he thrust his sword forward, and the sword shadow moved swiftly like lightning. It was incredibly fierce, and it went straight for Nyetian. That person was the sect leader of a sword sect, and his realm had already reached Saint Defire. But at that moment, he could only suppress his realm to the 9th level of sword heavenly disaster. Even so, his sword was still much stronger than that of an ordinary swordsman in the 9th level of sword heavenly disaster. Nyetian was in midair, and the sword shadow that came crashing down on him made him feel a hint of pressure. But he did not attack. Instead, he formed a sword at the tip of his finger, and his sword will gushed out like a stream of light that instantly destroyed the sword shadow before him. Puff! The swordsman in green on the sword pillar was stunned. He instinctively moved to the side, but he was still a step too slow. A piercing sword wound was left on his face, and it was so deep that his bones could be seen. How is this possible? The swordsman in green steadied himself. His face was full of shock as he stared at Nyetian in disbelief. He could not speak even after a long time had passed. He could not believe that Nyetian, who was only in the 4th level of sword heavenly disaster, could easily defeat him without drawing his sword. Nyetian blurred into action and said with a cold smile, "You won't be able to defend this sword pillar. Give it to me." Bullsh asterisk T. No matter what, the swordsman in green was a sect leader. He immediately flew into a rage, and the sword will around him exploded to the extreme. He pressed down with his sword, and the sword shadow pounced on him like a wild beast. Nyetian's lips curled up slightly. He gathered his sword while on his finger, and even though he attacked later, it reached him first. It brushed past the swordsman's neck. Then he came before the sword pillar and stared at the swordsman in green with a cold expression. "Thanks." The swordsman in green stared at Nyetian. No matter how stupid he was, he knew that Nyetian had shown him mercy, or else his head would have been on the ground. He bowed unwillingly, moved, and left the sword pillar. Nyetian smiled faintly and took a step forward. He stood on the sword pillar like a sharp sword that shone brightly. Chapter 43:06. On top of the underworld sword pillar, Nyet Tianling stood alone. Like a lion, he guarded his territory. Around him, dozens of swordsmen were itching to give a try. They were all waiting for the right moment to strike. Though Nyetian had demonstrated extraordinary capabilities, compared to the others on top of the pillar, he was far too weak. Naturally, he became the target of other swordsmen. Looks like I went too easy on them. They thought I was a pushover. Nyetian looked around and bitterly smiled. When other swordsmen fought for the sword pillars, they gave it their all and did not hesitate to kill. But Nyetian only defeated his competitors and did not kill them. Because of this, he was naturally viewed as a weakling. "Everyone, let's attack together and kill this young man." Just then, a swordsman with a pair of triangular eyes spoke coldly and with a dark expression. "All right." Everyone else had the same idea and immediately agreed. "All right, then let's do it." Nyetian was not afraid at all. Instead, His face was full of anticipation and excitement. He wanted to see just how much more powerful he had become after the star mark was unsealed. "You are seeking death." The triangular-eyed swordsman was enraged. He growled and the sword around him exploded. He slashed out angrily. The shadow of the sword was extremely sharp and emitted cold killer's intent. It was obvious that he didn't hold back at all and didn't mind directly killing Nyation. Feeling the killer's intent, Nyation's lips curled up into a cold smile. Since his opponent was acting this way, then he had nothing to worry about. In the next second, the sword in the sky was unsheathed. A crisp sword hum pierced through the air and a wave of sword energy surged out. Nyation's long sword swept across. The sword slashed through 8 barren lands. The anger of a demon and god could not be stopped. Bang! 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 In the next second, after a series of muffled noises, dozens of swordsmen were flung out. Some even exploded and died tragically. They turned into a pool of blood in the air. How is this possible? Everyone stabilized themselves. They had been seriously injured, and they looked at Nyation in shock and disbelief. They were all powerful warriors in the Sword Dao, and some of them were even swordsmen in Saint D Fire Realm. Yet when they worked together, they were heavily injured by a swordsman who was only in the 4th level of Sword Heavenly Disaster. This was simply too terrifying. How did Nyation possess such terrifying strength? Nyation stood on the sword pillar and could not help but purse his lips. He did not expect the power of this sword to be so strong. One must know that he did not use his full strength. He only swung his sword to test the waters. If he had used his full strength just now, these dozens of people would have died on the spot. On the other sword pillar, a pair of eyes stared fixedly at Nyation. Amidst the surprise, there was an unconcealable excitement. The owner of this pair of eyes was none other than the young human sovereign, Lin Fan. To think that he would be able to raise his strength so quickly in just a few days. Interesting. Lin Fan's lips twitched as his eyes shone with a strange gleam. He did not expect Nyation's strength to increase so quickly. But when he saw this, he was very happy. If it had been the previous Nyation, he would not have been his opponent at all. The current Nyation finally piqued his interest a little. It would be too boring if he won the bet by crushing his opponent. But now he had some fun. Because of Nyation's strong performance, no other swordsman dared to challenge him. Soon, the battle for the sword pillars came to an end. 200 swordsmen stood on the sword pillars and announced that they were the victors. Congratulations, everyone. You have successfully entered the 2nd stage of the Yellow Springs contest. 3 days later, the contest will be held here. Please come on time, Human Sovereign said loudly. Once he finished speaking, he left. Nyation breathed a sigh of relief. In the next 3 days, he could consolidate his strength so that he could perform even better in the contest. But at this time, he saw a gloomy face looking at him from afar. It was Mori Shire. This guy, is he also going to comprehend the sword in the Yellow Springs? Nyation frowned, and his heart sank. Mori Shire was a terrifying character. If he met him during the contest, it would be troublesome. Mori Shire's lips twitched into a cold smile. Then he moved and left. Nyation, it seems that he has his eyes on you, Yin Feng said worriedly with a gloomy face. One Lin Fan was troublesome enough. Now that Mori Shire was here, Nyation would be in a terrible situation. He probably won't kill me, at least not now, Nyation said with a smile as he shook his head bitterly. When he was in the monument of the Yellow Springs, he had felt Mori Shire's killing intent, but the latter hesitated later. Nyation guessed that he should have some secrets that Mori Shire was interested in, so the latter did not attack him. And he was also very curious about the relationship between the Star Original Stone and Mori Shire's third soul. Soon, 3 days had passed, and 200 swordsmen gathered above the sword pillars. As for the other eliminated swordsmen, except for the dozens chosen by the human emperor to stay as judges, the rest had been driven out of the Yellow Springs Holy Land. And the following battles were just to determine who would win first. Even those who lost could enter the flower of the Yellow Springs to comprehend the sword. Senior Scarlet Life, it is too risky to comprehend the sword in the Yellow Springs. I think you should think about it carefully. At this time, Nietion was trying to dissuade the Scarlet Life loyal heart. It was too dangerous to comprehend the sword in the Yellow Springs. Unless one was an extremely talented swordsman, entering the flower of the Yellow Springs was equivalent to courting death. Nietion admitted that the Scarlet Life loyal heart was a top-notch swordsman, but its talent had not reached the peak. If the Scarlet Life loyal heart wanted to participate in the sword in the Yellow Springs, he was afraid that the result would be tragic. Nietion, you don't have to persuade me. I know how talented I am. The Scarlet Life loyal heart nodded slightly, but its eyes were extremely firm. But comprehending the sword in the Yellow Springs is my chance. Even if it is only 1 in a billion, I cannot give it up. Nietion suddenly became silent and did not know what to say. Of course, he knew what the Scarlet Life loyal heart was thinking. The latter really wanted to avenge Dong Wang Zhengrong. In the past, in order to make a breakthrough, the Scarlet Life loyal heart did not hesitate to take Yu Jingxin's sword embryo with insidious means. So now, even if it knew that there was a bottomless abyss in front of it, the Scarlet Life loyal heart had to jump in without hesitation. After a long time, Nietion let out a long breath and nodded silently. In next to no time, the Battle of Apex had begun. The rules of the battle were simple and brutal. The loser would be eliminated, and the winner would advance to the next round. Of course, during the battle, the performance of the Cry of Underworld Sword would be combined to avoid the battle between the strong. The 4 sword pillars formed a battlefield, and the first round would have 50 battles going on at the same time. After a while, Niet Tianling stood on a sword pillar, waiting for his opponent to come up. Soon, a tyrannical figure appeared in front of Nietion. Chapter 4307. Nietion looked at Shan Yishui in front of him, and his lips curled into a cold smile. He did not expect his first opponent to be this guy. Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. It's you little brat. Shan Yishui looked at Nietion with the same murderous intent. He had long noticed that Nietion and Yin Fenghua were very close. The two of them were obviously very close. Yin Fenghua had almost killed him previously. This was a good opportunity for him to take revenge on Nietion. Come on. Nietion felt Shan Yishui's murderous intent, but he had a playful look on his face as he spoke cold. You're courting death. Shan Yishui roared, and his sword broke the waves. His sword essence turned into rolling black water and pressed down on Nietion with the momentum of a landslide and a tsunami. Niet Tianling stood on the sword pillar, unmoving like a mountain. He did not even draw his sword. In the next instant, the sword essence whizzed past, but Niet Tian did not move at all. He was not injured at all. How is this possible? Shan Yishui's face changed in shock. He looked at Niet Tian in fear and could not believe the scene in front of him. He had used all his strength in his sword, but he had not injured Niet Tian at all. How could this be? His sword essence was extremely powerful and destructive. Even if he suppressed his cultivation to the 9th level of the Sword Heaven's Calamity, an ordinary Tianjua Sage Emperor would not be able to withstand it. But Niet Tian was only at the 4th level of the Heaven's Calamity. How could he be unharmed? It seems that this brat's martial body is much stronger than an ordinary Sage King. Shan Yishui was a swordsman who had experienced hundreds of battles. He immediately calmed down, but he was a little more afraid of Niet Tian. Scared, Niet Tian saw the fear in Shan Yishui's eyes and couldn't help but smile. He said coldly, "It turns out that the rumored heavy sword 3 fierce beasts, who kill people like flies, can also feel fear. I'm afraid of your ancestors." Shan Yishui was instantly enraged. With a roar, his sword was surged once again. This time, he gave it his all. He directly burned his blood chi, exploding with his strongest sword attack towards Niet Tian. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Instantly, the sound of crashing waves could be heard in the sky. It was as if giant waves were rising and shaking the world. At the same time, it was accompanied by an incomparably tyrannical, killing intent, as if it wanted to destroy everything. Facing Shan Yishui's life-risking sword, Niet Tian did not panic. He He did not even draw his sword. In the next moment, he took a step forward, and the accumulated sword will in his body burst out like a landslide. Suddenly, the sword light shot up into the sky, and the sword will filled the sky, as if it was going to cover the world. Bang! Following that, a muffled sound was heard in the air. Shan Ashui did not even have time to scream before he was sent flying. He drew a line of blood in the air, and not even his bones were left. When the surrounding swordsmen saw this scene, they all gasped and felt a chill run down their spines. Who would have thought that Nietan, who looked ordinary and mediocre, would burst forth with such overwhelming sword intent in a split second? What was even more terrifying was that Nietan did not draw his sword. A swordsman did not draw his sword. What did this mean? This meant that Nietan did not reveal his true strength. If he drew his sword, Shan Ashui would not even have the chance to attack. The young silver-haired swordsman before them was too terrifying. Everyone's eyes were trembling. The fear in their eyes was obvious. Second brother. At that moment, a shrill scream was heard. Following that, a figure appeared. He was furious, and his hair stood up. He was like a trapped beast, and his eyes were filled with ferocity. Nietan turned around and saw that the person in front of him was the leader of the heavy sword Three Devils, Sword Slayer, Lung Chinxiang. What? Do you want to try? Nietan's lips twitched. He was not afraid at all, but rather very provocative. Little bastard, I want you to pay with your life for my second brothers. Lung Chinxiang's eyes were filled with ferocity. Sword will and killing intent surged around her, as if they had condensed into a substance. She approached Nietan, and the surrounding air seemed to have solidified. At this moment, the surrounding swordsmen were attracted over and whispered to each other. This kid killed the second brother of the heavy sword Three Devils. He is really daring. Exactly. Others avoid the heavy sword Three Devils, but this kid dared to kill them. He must have a strong background. Is the Sword Slayer going to attack this kid directly? Everyone's eyes lit up as they talked. They were obviously expecting something. In the distance, Yin Feng Wua and the Scarlet Life Loyal Essence locked their breaths on Lung Chinxiang. If the latter made any strange movements, they would immediately attack. Lung Chinxiang's face was gloomy, and his eyes were about to bleed. Back off. Just as he was about to attack, a cold voice rang out. Then a huge killing intent filled the air, forcing everyone to step back. Tang Baiming. Yin Feng Wua's eyes trembled slightly, and his expression changed. He did not expect that Tang Baiming would actually stand up to stop Lung Chinxiang. Lord Manor Lord. Lung Chinxiang bellowed, clearly very unwilling. Tang Baiming's face was cold and solemn. He said in a deep voice, "My heavy sword manor can afford to lose. If you want to avenge your second brother, then kill him openly on the battlefield. Attacking him now will only make others look down on our heavy sword manor." Yes, Lung Chinxiang's eyes were red. Even if he was extremely unwilling, he could only retreat at this moment. Little junior brother, if there is a chance, I would like to learn a thing or two from you. I would like to see what that old thing has taught you. Tang Baiming looked at Nietan and said sinisterly. Obviously, he thought that Nietan was Yin Feng Wua's disciple. But that was not the case. Nietan and Yin Feng Wua called each other brothers. Okay. Nietan did not care and responded with a faint smile. Tang Baiming did not say anything else. His figure moved and he left. Nietan also walked down the sword pillar, very indifferent. He did not want to kill, but unfortunately, his first battle was with Shan Ishui. Nietan, are you all right? Yin Feng Wua looked at Nietan and asked in a deep voice. Nietan smiled faintly and shook his head. Yin Feng Wua nodded, his eyes filled with unconcealable joy. He had already known that Nietan's strength had improved by leaps and bounds, but he hadn't expected Nietan to have become so terrifyingly strong. Shan Ishui was not a top sword genius, but he was definitely a talented person. Otherwise, he would not be ranked among the heavy sword Three Beasts. Nietan killing Shan Ishui so easily was indeed out of Yin Feng Wua's expectations. Even if it was Yin Feng Wua himself, if he suppressed his realm to the sword Heavenly Tribulation 4 and did not use his sword, he might not be able to kill Shan Yixue directly. In other words, Yin Fenghua was no longer Nietian's match at the same realm. Chapter 43:08. The first round of the Yellow Springs battle ended quickly. 100 martial artists advanced, 100 martial artists were eliminated, and a dozen were even killed on the spot. Without any pause, the second round of battles began. Nietian's opponent was a young swordsman who posed no threat to him and was defeated in a few moves. After walking down the sword pillar, a battle on the other side attracted Nietian's attention. He was very familiar with both sides. One was the 8th-star emissary, Scarlet Life Loyal Heart, and the other was the master of Chunjian Villa, Tang Baiming. Nietian frowned and couldn't help but worry. Tang Baiming had learned swordsmanship from Yin Fenghua, and with his 9-kill sword essence, he was indeed a terrifying opponent. Even when Yin Fenghua fought Tang Baiming, he barely won. But it was a normal battle, and Yin Fenghua won because his cultivation level was higher than Tang Baiming's. But now, both Tang Baiming and Scarlet Life Loyal Heart had suppressed their cultivation level to the 9 Heavenly Tribulation sword realm. Bang! At this moment, the two swords collided on the sword pillar. Scarlet Life Loyal Heart retreated, leaving a terrifying sword mark on his body. Scarlet Life Loyal Heart was naturally not weak, but compared to Tang Baiming, he was clearly much weaker. Senior Scarlet Life, don't force yourself. Nietian frowned, and he was even more worried. He knew Scarlet Life Loyal Heart's temperament very well. The latter was extremely stubborn and would not easily let go of something he had set his mind on. For example, in the Yellow Springs sword comprehension competition, he knew that it was dangerous, but he still insisted on participating. Heaven Martial Association's president, you don't deserve your reputation. Tang Baiming's eyes were cold, and he was extremely arrogant. The 9 kills sword essence surged around him, and the almost tangible killing intent sealed the surrounding void. Scarlet Life Loyal Heart suddenly felt the approaching killing intent, and he suddenly realized that his opponent was not trying to defeat him, but to kill him. Oh no! Yin Fenghua had also ended his battle and came to Nietian's side. His expression changed, and his eyes darkened. He could tell what Tang Baiming was trying to do. When he had fought Tang Baiming previously, the latter had also used the 9-kill sword intent to seal the void. If it wasn't for his superb swordsmanship, he might have died under the 9-kill sword intent. How many chances did the Crimson Life Loyal Essence have to survive the 9-kill sword essence? It won't be that easy to kill me. The Scarlet Life Loyal Heart was ridiculed by the opponent. How could it not be angry? The flames in its eyes were rolling, and the sacred heaven sword will around it was like a rainbow, shaking the surrounding void. There is no conflict between the Sunward Villa and the Heaven Martial Association. It's just that you're too close to that kid called Nietian. Tang Baiming laughed coldly. His silhouette flickered as he slashed out with his sword. Instantly, boundless sword intent gushed forth like a waterfall, pressing down on the Scarlet Life Loyal Heart. As the killing intent descended, the Red Life Dan Xian suddenly felt the pressure, but it was not afraid. The long sword in the air slashed out. Bang! The next moment, the two tyrannical sword intents collided, and a muffled sound exploded in the air, as if the sky and earth were about to collapse. The Scarlet Life Loyal Heart flew out, leaving a trail of blood in the air, and fell directly onto the sword pillar. Senior. Seeing this, Nietian flashed over and caught the Scarlet Life Loyal Heart. The Scarlet Life Loyal Heart steadied itself. There was blood at the corner of its mouth, and it smiled bitterly, indicating that it was fine. Although he had been severely injured by the sword strike just now, it had allowed him to escape from the area sealed by the 9-kill sword will. Tang Baiming's eyes were cold, and his face was gloomy. Under the situation where his strength was suppressed, the power of the 9-kill sword intent could not be exerted, and the Scarlet Life Loyal Heart still managed to escape. Yin Fenghua let out a long breath. The Scarlet Life Loyal Heart had survived, and that was the best result. The second round of the competition soon ended, and there were only 50 winners left. Then, the third round began. Nyetian stepped onto the sword pillar, and the sword intent around him surged. "Brat, you're finally here." The next moment, a low voice sounded, and a figure descended. A powerful sword fell, accompanied by a fierce and threatening killing intent. Lung Chinxiang. Nyetian's mouth twitched, and his eyes flashed with the same killing intent. Since the battle was arranged by the people of Human Sovereign, it was not strange that he met Lung Chinxiang. "Brat, pay for my second brother's life." Lung Chinxiang did not say any nonsense and directly roared. The sword intent in his body suddenly burst out, and like a landslide, it gathered a monstrous killing intent and fell on Nyetian. Nyetian's face was calm, and his eyes were full of disdain. Lung Chinxiang was known as the Sword Butcher and ranked first among the three evils of the heavy sword. Naturally, he was not an ordinary swordsman, but in the eyes of Nyetian, he was not a threat. This time, Nyetian still did not intend to use his sword. He could use Lung Chinxiang's killing intent to polish his martial body. The sword fell, and the surrounding space was filled with endless killing intent. But Tianling stood on the sword pillar, like a rock, majestic and motionless. "This is impossible." Lung Chinxiang's pupils shrank, and his face was extremely shocked. He couldn't believe that his all-out strike hadn't hurt Nyetian in the slightest. This scene was very similar to what had happened to Shan Ashui previously. The infamous sword slaughterer only has this much ability. The corners of Nyetian's mouth curled up into a cold smile as he said, "How disappointing. You're looking for death." Lung Chinxiang was instantly furious, and he roared like thunder. Then a sword intent burst out from his body, and the killing intent in the surrounding space suddenly became intense. The atmosphere was cold to the bone, as if falling into an ice cellar. Nyetian frowned. He could feel that Lung Chinxiang released some kind of restrictive power in his body. "Die!" Lung Chinxiang roared, and his sword directly slashed out. Suddenly, a smoke-like sword shadow appeared, like a giant beast in the darkness, suddenly opening its bloodthirsty eyes, full of killing intent. Nyetian was as still as a mountain. His body shook, and the fiend god sword intent burst out from his body. The power of the fiend god burst out and actually broke through the killing intent imprisonment. Then, a sword shadow as dark as the abyss appeared, and made the surrounding space dark and gloomy, like black clouds pressing down on a city. Rumble. The next moment, the two sword shadows collided, and the heaven and earth became solemn. Then, endless crazy sword waves rushed out, spreading wildly in all directions. Nyetian's figure trembled slightly, and then he retreated a few steps, and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. But that was all. On the other side, Lung Chinxiang screamed, and under the impact of the sword waves, her body cracked inch by inch, and finally turned into a bloody light. Not even her bones were left. After a long time, the sword waves dispersed, and Nyetian stood on the sword pillar. The sword pillar opposite him was empty, leaving only the smell of blood in the air, which had not completely dispersed. The atmosphere in the air was as silent as the night, stifling and suffocating. Several spectating swordsmen were shocked and could not react for a long time. Chapter 4309. The third round of the Yellow Springs struggle ended quickly, and only 25 people advanced. Nyetian looked at them. Among the 25 people, the weakest was the swordsman who triggered the cry of the earth during the Yellow Springs sword chant. There were also swordsmen who were strong. Among these people, there were 4 people that Nyetian was afraid of: Human Emperor Mu Jioga, the young Human Emperor Lin Fan, Mori Shire, and the master of Chunjian Villa, Tang Baiming. These 4 people were all talented swordsmen, especially Mori Shire and Human Emperor, who were almost unfathomable. In the Yellow Springs Sanctuary, Mori Shire was even scarier than Human Emperor. The 25 people fought each other in pairs, and the last person would draw lots to advance to the next round. Coincidentally, the person who advanced to the next round was Mori Shire. I don't know if this guy is lucky, or if all of us are lucky. Nyetian let out a long sigh and smiled bitterly. Mori Shire advancing to the next round was probably what everyone wanted to see, because in the Yellow Springs Sanctuary, Mori Shire was almost unbeatable. To put it bluntly, even Human Emperor did not want his opponent to be Mori Shire. After a while, the fourth round began, and there were 6 battles at the same time. Nietian was just a spectator, and he would participate in the next 6 battles. At this time, a battle attracted Nietian's attention, because the 2 people in the battle were people he was very familiar with, Yin Fengwua and Lin Fan. One is the selfless sword demon, who is on par with the young God Sword Emperor, and the other is the next Human Emperor of the Human Emperor Hall. The battle between these 2 should be very exciting. Nietian's eyes dimmed as he thought to himself. But to be honest, in Nietian's heart, Lin Fan was more talented than Yin Fengwua. When Lin Fan triggered the Cry of Heaven, Yin Fengwua himself admitted that Lin Fan's talent was no weaker than the young God Sword Emperor. On the other side, Ren Huang looked at the 2 people on top of the sword pillar with a playful look on his face. Obviously, he was also looking forward to it. On top of the sword pillar, Yin Feng's selfless sword was like a sword. The 7-wounding sword will carry traces of blood qi, causing the surrounding atmosphere to be filled with naked killing intent. The surrounding swordsmen frowned. Just the stench of blood alone was enough to make them feel a strong sense of oppression. However, Lin Fan didn't care at all. Instead, he looked at Yin Fengwua with a playful expression. His eyes were actually filled with admiration. It was the admiration of a superior towards a subordinate. Yin Fengwua's face darkened instantly. To him, Lin Fan's gaze was clearly a form of humiliation. Senior Yin Feng, my master has mentioned you to me many times. He said that you are a rare sword genius. Even Lord Yang God respected you very much. Lin Fan smiled and bowed slightly to Yin Fengwua, even though it was to express that Yin Fengwua was respectful, but there was a hint of provocation in his words. He said, "Today, I have the honor to seek guidance from Senior. I hope that Senior will not be stingy with your guidance." Yin Fengwua frowned and sneered. "You are really courteous. It seems the Human Emperor has accepted a good disciple." Of course. Lin Fan smiled faintly and said, "My master has taught me to respect the old and love the young since I was a child. I feel that Senior is old and weak and has passed the peak period. I am willing to let Senior have 3 strikes. What do you think? Brat, the battle between you and me should be fair. Let's not talk nonsense. Let's fight." Yin Fengwua's face suddenly darkened. Even if he had a strong state of mind, he couldn't help but feel a little angry at being provoked by a young man. Yes. However, he still maintained a trace of reason. If it was someone else, he would probably let Lin Fan have 3 strikes, which would be exactly what Lin Fan wanted. If that's the case, then I will offend you. Lin Fan smiled sinisterly, and then his figure moved directly. He slashed out with his sword. The treacherous sword will actually came from all directions. It was like an overwhelming dark cloud, directly suppressing Yin Fengwua's 7 kills. Sword momentum. Yin Fengwua's heart trembled, and his eyes were filled with shock. The strength of Lin Fan's sword was even stronger than he had expected. However, he quickly calmed down. The long sword in his hand crossed the sky, and the sword light covered the sky, forcibly blocking the sword momentum in the sky. However, Yin Fengwua's body shook slightly, and there was a surge of qi and blood in his body. He almost spat out a mouthful of blood. On the other hand, Lin Fan was as steady as an old tree, not moving at all. This guy is so strong. Nietian's eyes trembled violently, and his heart was filled with shock. Just from this sword, it could be seen that Lin Fan's sword was stronger than Yin Fengwua's. The surrounding people were also attracted by this, and they discussed in shock. This guy named Lin Fan is so strong. No wonder he is a swordsman who can trigger the cry of the sky. This fat old man is not easy to deal with. I think even the Human Emperor is quite afraid of him. I don't know where he came from. I heard that he is a swordsman of the same era as Lord Yang God. I guess he is also a person who has been buried up to his neck. It is not easy for him to maintain his strength so well under the exhaustion of qi and blood. The crowd was talking while watching the battle with great interest. The people present were either talented or strong, and they all had a very strong perception of sword will. Of course, they could see the strength of Lin Fan and Yin Fengwu. Although Lin Fan was young, his sword was suppressing Yin Fengwu. Obviously, victory was in his hands. Senior, your face is so red. Is it because your qi and blood are unstable? On the sword pillar, Lin Fan looked at Yin Fengwu and mocked. If you want to fight, then fight. Stop talking nonsense. Yin Fengwu shouted coldly. His figure flashed, and he directly took the initiative. The 7-kill sword will covered the sky and the sun, surging like a tide, as if it was going to tear this part of the world. Lin Fan was not afraid at all. His sword broke through the sky, and the sword was like a rainbow. Where the sword light bloomed, it shattered the oncoming sword will, and then forced Yin Fengwu to take a few steps back. Yin Fengwu stabilized his body. His face was livid, and his eyes were full of anger, but he did not dare to attack casually. In his life, he rarely had an opponent. He did not expect that he would be forced into such an embarrassing situation by a little boy. Senior, your sword is too soft. It really is like a little girl's fist. The corner of Lin Fan's mouth twitched coldly. He tore off his disguise and directly laughed wildly. Yin Fengwu clenched the sword in his hand tightly. But in the next moment, his eyes suddenly trembled, and he directly said, I admit defeat. Lin Fan's eyes suddenly narrowed, and his face was full of shock. Obviously, he did not expect Yin Fengwu to directly admit defeat. Where is your dignity as a swordsman? Where is your sword principle? Where is your sword heart and sword soul? And there was also an uproar below the field. Yin Fengwu's action was too unexpected, and it caught everyone off guard. Yin Fengwu did not pay too much attention to it. His figure moved, and he directly jumped down from the sword pillar and came to the side of Nietian. Big brother. Nietian looked at Yin Fengwu, and he could even hear the latter's heart trembling.